Hello. Welcome to Saber What Ifs, where you can get your daily dose of what if content. If you enjoy this video, make sure subscribe and like this video to motivate me to make more. Without further ado, let's get into this fanfic. Chapter 12, Prototype Testing. I do not own Fate/Stay Night and Stuffs. Oh. England. It had been 3 days since Waver had collected enough information to put his plan into action and taken the first step when a very angry department head walked into his room with his assistant and several other department members. That was 2.5 days longer than he had expected them to react. Lord Elmeloy. His boss growled at him with a dangerous look in his eyes. It has come to our attention that you have enacted activities that are most unbecoming of your position. Waver didn't flinch from his desk. Compared to nearly being killed by Gilgamesh when the Golden Man was less than 2 meters away, his boss was nowhere near as terrifying. Oh. The young adult raised an eyebrow curiously as he continued to scan his paperwork as if he was in just another conversation. Can you elaborate, please? I'm afraid that I am unaware of what you are talking about, as I have made sure that everything I have done is within the range of the power entrusted to me by the association and the Archibald family. Don't test our patience, boy. Growled a woman of noble standing. Waver recalled that she had a family history of around 7 to 8 generations. This of course meant that she was likely to be as big of a pain as any other noble in the clock tower. She took out a flyer and placed it roughly on his desk. What is this foolishness about setting up a dead apostle ancestor hunt without informing or asking approval from the committee or the higher members of the tower? The flyer, while a bit crude for anyone's tastes, was Waver's first step in dealing with the Louvre situation. He had posted it up on every board that was in areas where enforcers tended to frequent, and its message was clear as could be. Lord Elmeloy was setting up a hunt for the dead apostle ancestor Louvre. The location was decided and confirmed, and most importantly, should the apostle be defeated and his collection be found, all participants would have their choice of whatever mystic code, minus the ones that were deemed too important or dangerous, of course, obtained in the vampire's dwelling. In short, it was roughly the equivalent of what Ryder did in the beginning of the Fourth War when he stopped his chariot in between Lancer and Saber and asked them to join him in world conquest in terms of insane audacity. He had already received a fair number of acceptations from several enforcers, and given another few days he was certain to have enough members to confidently begin the next step of his plan, that is if he managed to get past the obstacles that were in front of him. I doubt that I could have made the message any more clear, my lady. Waver replied politely. I have decided to form a party to hunt the dead apostle Louvre. I have done enough data and research to accurately guess where his fortress is located, and am looking for individuals with enough skill and efficiency to aid me in this task. You are actively hunting down an ancestor, shouted another lord. That is strictly forbidden for one such as yourself. Under most circumstances you are indeed correct. Waver nodded. However, there are circumstances that enable me to circumvent that condition. You see, while I am among the lower-ranking lords, I am also in charge of the McGinty disappearance case. This enables me to act as a higher authority with regards to anything that is sufficiently related to this job, and it just so happens. He took out a folder that he had prepared just for this moment. That I have recently determined that the apostle of our conversation is the culprit of said crime and must be dealt with in a timely and efficient manner due to the fact that there is a chance that he managed to convince McGinty to start making mystic codes for him. He leaned back into his chair and met their unsettled eyes with his own. It has been 6 days since I discovered this fact, and Tower protocol dictates that I am required to inform my superiors of ancestor activity within 1 week. Therefore I have yet to do anything wrong. His superior in the department stepped up. That may excuse you from not informing anyone about your exact discovery, Velvet, however you are still overstepping your position by setting up the hunt in the first place. He sighed and reached into his desk for one of his cigars. Once again, due to current circumstances, I have not exceeded my position in the slightest. Current rules indeed dictate that all apostle information is indeed restricted, Anything regarding the hunts are less finite since very few individuals outside the enforcers are interested in encountering any of the 27 in combat, and the fact that it is difficult to even pinpoint where their locations are. Again, my position in managing McGinty's disappearance has enabled me to fulfill the requirements of starting a group to investigate this lead to the best of my abilities and utilizing my resources. He pointed to the flyer. Those pieces of paper were my resource, and despite the crude display, it has served me quite well so far. You seem quite convinced that the location you have pointed out is where the Apostle, and McGinty in turn, are located. Mused the eldest and until then quietest member of those that entered his room. How is it you came across it so quickly? Waver nodded, somewhat relieved that he was answering a question that wasn't directly accusing him of something for once, and took out several maps. To start with, I have always been a magus that has focused more along the lines of practical analysis. To this end, I have mastered several basic spells that while alone are fairly useless and mundane, but in conjunction or fine-tuned are fairly efficient and useful for what I do. Among them is my information retaining and information recording spells, similar to ones that are used by high-ranking alchemists in Atlas. Using those, I recorded all the information regarding Louv's movements and past locations in a night and created an outline per half a decade of Norway that shows the possibility of where his dwelling may be. He pointed to several maps of the country that held various percentages and notes of past appearances and activities. After that, I then spent the next day analyzing any and all significant thaumaturgical and vampirical related activity reports in Norway and made charts that, by every 5 years again, indicate the level of said activity. Taking the cigar out of his mouth, the man drew a rune into the air lazily with its burnt end, causing the papers to fly up in a neat order next to one another. Another rune drawn caused the ones that were made off of the vampire's activity to be transparent, and a third rune caused all the ones that had aligned timelines to overlap. It didn't take long for the visiting lords to see a correspondence between Louv's activity, the directions he traveled, and undefined thaumaturgy activity in the country. Interestingly enough, the locations changed every 10 to 20 years looking at the graphs, but they seemed to occasionally return to a previously occupied spot like a random cycle. That a fourth rune from Waver caused all of the charts to return to his desk except for a handful which indicated one area in particular, including the maps that were up to the current date. My third day was spent researching the local legends and histories of the areas that Louvre might be occupied in now in order to gain a better understanding of the geography and whatever means he might employ as a defense. He shrugged. After I was certain in my findings, I spent the rest of the night making my posters, setting them up, and sleeping as much as I could. The nobles relented as they were put up with evidence that they could not deny was rather accurate and irrefutable. Waver may be of low standing in terms of magical ability and specified advanced theory when compared to other lords, but he had earned his standing with his ability to relentlessly study something to the point of knowing the subject to perfection, such that whenever someone asked him to prove a theory or some idea, he was sure to provide a perfect and absolute response that no one would be able to argue against unless it was something of secretive nature such as the sorceries or family-specified magics. Impressive, grunted the department head reluctantly. As expected of Lord Elmeloy. Thank you, sir. Waver nodded his head. A question. Why are you so dedicated to aiding McGinty? A member of the Department of Spiritual Evocation asked. Waver received mixed feeling from that particular department since he returned from Fiuki. On one hand, he was partially responsible for the death of one of their most prominent members. On the other, he gave them an extremely insightful and detailed report on heroic spirits and noble phantasms soon after returning from the war that made many of the researchers there worship his name for a good while. While he is a member of the Tower and a notable one at that, he is not truly that significant in the grand scheme of things, nor is he a lord. Waver shook his head. He is a companion that has aided me in my research for several years now. While he is an unsightly individual at times, he is also a breath of fresh air for me as well as a new perspective for my experiments and studies. In turn, I aid him when I can. My recent display of runecraft, for example, is a result of his tutelage. Likewise his recent breakthrough in soul-infused weapons that he demonstrated at the previous Mystic Code and Enchanted Artifact Conference were partially due to my assistance. He blew out a ring of smoke. Should he pass on, it would take me a long time to come across someone of his capability and control to sufficiently aid my research to that degree. He shook his head. Well, there's that and the fact that if I let him die there's the chance I may receive the ire of the kaleidoscope should he ever return. A small period of silence permeated the room as all there looked at one another warily, knowing exactly what Waver was talking about. The master of the second sorcery was not exactly a predictable individual, so the young lord's excuse, while a bit casual for their tastes, was certainly reasonable. It's a shame you did not put other significant individuals' thoughts on your actions into your calculations. Stated a new voice belonging to a person outside the room, surprising everyone there. Turning around, they all laid eyes on the Queen of the Clock Tower, Lorelei Bartholomew, standing in her standard noble clothes with proper posture and looking directly at Waver. As mentioned previously, Waver was not intimidated at all by his department head's anger in the slightest as he compared their presence with Gilgamesh's. As such, Lorelei's presence and focus on him alone merely made him terrified to the point where he could not be able to perform magic efficiently. Lord Bartholomew. Waver stammered. This is unexpected. I was about to say the same thing of you, Lord Elmeloy. She stated with a hint of irritation which was not missed by anyone in the room. Imagine my surprise when I discovered that not only had the location of an ancestor had been discovered and I had not been notified, but that there was a crude gathering of magi who were going to join in for the sole sake of some trinkets instead of the glory of killing one of the abominations. Waver gulped. This was not good. Pissing off the Queen was as close to getting a death sentence as one could get in the clock tower. My apologies, my lord, however I believe that time was of the essence, and in order to ensure that McGinty had a significant chance of remaining unharmed I determined that I would not only have to remain a part of the hunt, but as the one in charge as well. I am one of the few people that are aware of how he has altered his body, and what to look for should his magic be interrupted in any way. Waver hoped that his explanation and his hinting at the mysteries that Sirius had performed on himself would at least intrigue the woman enough to postpone his death until after he rescued the man. The Queen on the other hand merely snorted and turned around. Your relationship with the Code Crafter nor what magic he has performed on himself has no interest to me. You have my permission to gather a force of 100 for this hunt, Lord Meloy, however be warned. Should you fail to kill the monster or should your assumption of his location be incorrect, I will have you stripped of your rank and executed, even if you somehow manage to retrieve the crafter. Waver swallowed heavily and bowed. Your generosity is a blessing, my lord. Thank you. Hold your empty praises and gather your forces faster. The woman scoffed as she walked away. Seeing those pathetic posters set up everywhere is a blight to my eyes. Besides, that ancestor is a weakling compared to the others anyways. It's not worth my time to hunt him down if he was found that easily. The youngest lord there nodded shakily before turning to his other guests. If you will excuse me, ladies, gentlemen. I have to go remove my posters and set up a more tasteful request for my hunt post haste, else Lord Bartholomew will kill me. He didn't bother to wait for the others to leave as he poured prana into his legs and reinforced his body to above-average levels, courtesy of studying Shirou's and Sirius' approach to the application, and bolted down the wide hallways and past the Queen to do as she requested. Said woman mused with an impassive face as she watched the male run and turn around a corner. He runs fast for a pencil pusher, even with magic. Japan. Shirou yawned as he and Rin walked through the streets of Fuyuki for the 5th night in a row. The late nights were starting to get to him, and it was starting to show with his slumped posture and progressively sloppy cooking. It was still very good, mind you, but it got to the point where Taiga actually said that he was slipping, before downing the meal in front of her like a starving child. Hey Tosaka, there any chance you have some sort of spell or bounded field effect that can, I don't know, attract any nearby vampires or familiars to it? the faker asked casually. Despite the seriousness of the situation and the growing number of people disappearing, he and Rin had yet to encounter any significant number of vampire servants in their part of town. While unsettling, it also meant that their nights were full of the two just walking around and talking about random things. Even if I did have a spell like that, it wouldn't work. Rin yawned, having suffered from the lack of sleep more than Shirou. If these things are on average far enough that even you can't detect them, there's no way the spell would be able to reach them. Well, that stinks. The boy muttered as he rolled his shoulders and used his nose again. Or not. I still got nothing. Rin smirked. Don't worry, boy, I'll still give you a treat for trying if we don't get anything tonight. Haha. Shirou rolled his eyes. Why do I have the feeling that you've never actually had a dog? Because they're a waste of time. The girl answered as if it was obvious. Why get a useless animal when you can make a familiar? The son of the magus killer sighed. And I have another reason why I'm glad I wasn't raised like a normal magus. What? Rin tilted her head to the side, confused. What did I say? What's wrong with preferring a familiar? Did you even have a dog before? Shirou shook his head. No, I've never had a pet before and I still am having trouble making familiars, but that still doesn't mean I've never seen the benefit of having a normal animal before. I mean, taking care of something less fortunate and helpless than you that returns the favor with affection seems pretty nice when you think about it. He paused for a moment before donning an expressionless face. Well, Fujine technically falls into that category too, but I'll pretend she doesn't for the moment. His female partner snickered. That woman is still bugging you for food? She really should grow up. And thus we have a textbook definition of the pot calling the kettle black. Shirou mentally commented. At least she doesn't have a habit of trespassing on my property like some two-bit thief. He muttered. Rin took offense immediately. At least I can do more than just make swords appear out of thin air. Really, all you do is just fire off pieces of metal all over the place. If you could make something interesting like an enchanted weapon or something along those lines, I might actually consider you useful, but since you can only... Shirou began tuning Rin out at that point. For a moment he was tempted to produce one of his more interesting swords to shut her up, but he decided against it. Root knows how much more she would rant if he busted one of those out for some reason. So any word from the priest yet? He asked, hoping to distract her irritation with him for her irritation for her guardian. Much to his secret joy, the tactic almost always worked. No. Which means either he's dead, wounded, or he's still doing his job and hasn't found anything yet. Personally, I hope it's one of the first two. Rin immediately answered without skipping a beat. I see there's still plenty of love between you two. The boy commented with a tired tone, before stopping in his tracks. Well, at least we know for a fact that he hasn't killed the vampire yet. Is that so? The more versatile of the two asked curiously as she expanded her senses until she got the barest hint of prana usage a fair ways away. You really are a dog. She mumbled, somewhat ashamed that Shirou could detect something so distant so easily. Come on, this way. Shirou urged as he dashed in the direction of the irregularity, clearly using reinforcement if his speed was anything to go by. Wait up, damn it. Rin shouted as she followed suit, albeit she was slightly less used to going from 0 to 25 miles an hour so quickly. Keeping the combat specialist in sight, she ran after him while muttering curses under her breath until she saw him stop at the beginning of an alleyway. Halting next to him, she understood why he didn't simply just go guns, swords blazing. In front of them stood at least 20 zombie-like humans of various ages and builds. The number wasn't exact, however, as the sparse lighting in the alleyway between the average-sized buildings made it difficult to determine. Whoa. She blinked. Didn't expect this many. She's playing with us. Shirou stated darkly. There's no other reason to get this many in one place without her being here herself. He stepped forward, already with two swords in hand when Rin's hand stopped him from progressing. Something wrong? He asked without turning around. No. Not really. The Tosaka sighed as she stepped forward herself and rolled up her sleeves. I just think you should let me do my job, that's all. I mean, you've been doing most of the killing since this thing started. Let me have a bit of fun for once. She didn't notice the temporary look of shock on the boy's face as she closed her eyes and began to chant in German. Slowly a mass of prana swirled around her left arm where her family's magic crest was implanted, growing in power by the second. It was enough for Shirou to step back out of pure reflex and keep his guard around his partner as she continued to chant her foreign aria. It wasn't long till the undead had actually noticed that something odd was happening at the end of the alleyway, but by then it was too late as the girl finished the last syllable of her spell and swung her arm. At least a dozen massive blades tore down the alleyway and butchered the zombies to the point that the ones in front were nothing but mere chunks of flesh before the attack even reached the middle of the group. Mere flesh and bones provided no resistance for the attack as it continued forward unrelentingly until it collided with the building on the other side of the alleyway and was finally halted by the coarse concrete, leaving several gouges in the material. Shirou gulped as he inspected the damage. He was fairly certain that he could handle those numbers without much issue himself, but not with a single spell and so quickly without making much noise. Oh, how he was glad he was on her good side again. Rin smirked as she saw Shirou's expression. Are you finally realizing where you stand with respect to me, Emiya-kun? Shirou looked at her and then at the destruction before looking at her again. Yes? He said hopefully. Technically, so long as he knew what she was doing and could get a shot in on her, he was fairly certain that he could hit Rin before she could let loose a spell of that level on him, but he didn't dare say anything lest she actually attempt using a spell of said level on him. The girl clearly was expecting more if her disappointed look was any indication. Ugh. Why do I even bother? She shook her head and sighed tiredly. Look, just make yourself useful and repair any damage I might have done to the area, will you, Mr. Janitor? Yeah. The boy shook his head and looked at the alleyway now covered in corpses. Looking at everything but the dead and taking a deep breath to calm himself, he tapped into his circuits. In an instant he had the structure and data of the path in front of him and everything inside all mapped out. Rin had made 38 different gouges into the roads and buildings, but only one of them would actually require immediate attention if left alone. Fixing this would be easy. Trace, on. He muttered from right in front of Rin as he lightly touched the ground underneath him. Using his reinforcing magic, he seamlessly fused all the cuts in the area shut, and within seconds the area 50 meters in front of him was good as new, if one ignored the scores of dead bodies at least, but that was next on the faker's list of things to clean. Despite the sickening feeling in his stomach, the boy analyzed each and every one of the corpses in front of him before chanting his next spell. Key components and structures. Isolated. Withdrawing, slowly but noticeably, each and every one of the corpses in the alley began to decompose at an extremely rapid rate, clothes and all. He had told himself that it was better off this way, as he doubted that the families of those who had died would have preferred to have found their loved ones' bodies butchered, and he was fairly certain that anything less than a pure disappearance would cause unwanted attention in their area. When he was done, the only thing left of the bodies were puddles of unidentifiable substances. That's the best I can do with the bodies, Tosaka. He sighed as he stood up again, barely feeling the drain in his body from the spell. You'll have to do the rest. Rin stayed silent as she analyzed Shirou's work. He managed to fix everything perfectly from all the way back here without hesitation and decomposed the bodies such that even the clothes are now indistinguishable from the corpses. I thought that structural grasping, reinforcement and alteration were mundane arts, but he really has taken them to a terrifying level if he has such little trouble decomposing bodies so quickly. Humph. She grunted and walked up again, channeling more prana around her arm in the process. You're so useless without me. Moments later a small wave of water washed away the puddles that remained of the bodies. I'm sorry if I didn't brush up on getting rid of corpses, Tosaka. Shirou rolled his eyes as he turned the other way lazily. And in the next moment he had two blades crossed in front of him defensively while being blasted backwards and crashing into said unwary girl. The force carried the two a fair distance into the alleyway before they crashed into the ground hard. Ow! What the hell, Shirou? Rin yelled irritably as she picked herself up only to notice that one, said Shirou was coughing on the ground and holding his chest in pain, and two, there was now a third person alive and standing from the direction they were thrown from. In less time than it took for the girl to put two and two together, she had instantly poured prana into her arm, ready to cast any spell on a moment's notice, and managed to get into a crouching position. Who are you? She growled, no sign of fooling around left on her face. My. The newcomer purred in a sultry tone as she walked forward slowly, somehow so deep in the darkness of the night that only her figure was visible to the girl. That young man is quite impressive. On mere reflex he conjured those cute little toys of his and got in the way of my attack while defending himself in the process. Tosaka. Careful. Shirou gasped between breaths. He may have been able to block most of the damage, but he still had the wind clearly knocked out of him, and he wouldn't be surprised if at least one of his ribs was broken or bruised. Has a code. Mass manipulation. Too hard to deflect or block. Rin faltered at this information as she frantically went through the spells that would now be useful in this situation. She could wonder how the hell her partner managed to figure out their assailants' weapons mysteries so damn fast later. The boy's warnings caused the woman to stop momentarily. Ho! Now that is even more interesting, just one hit and you already know how my dear toy works. A few more casual steps forward brought her under a streetlight for the two to see clearly. She was a beautiful woman indeed, but what caught their attention most were the whip in her hands and her blood-red eyes. You wouldn't happen to be Shirou Emiya, would you, boy? She purred with a smirk. Rin grit her teeth. I thought you were still in training, Emiya-kun. When the hell did you piss off a vampire? Shirou panted as he slowly picked himself back up. His chest was on fire and his lungs were barely working at a fourth of what they normally did, but he had experienced this feeling before countless times with Bazette. He would manage somehow. I've never seen a damn vampire until just now. I'm just as clueless as you are. He breathed as two more weapons appeared in his hands and several more appeared in the air around him, pointed at his new target. Oh, how cute, they think they can fight me. The vampiress chuckled as she continued to walk forward. But as for why I'm after you, boy, well, simply consider it bad luck on your part. If it weren't for who you know, this wouldn't happen. However, I'm not supposed to kill you until father says it's okay to, so I'm just going to have to take you hostage for now. She turned her attention to Rin and her smile turned sweetly sadistic. You, on the other hand. Dodge. Shirou yelled as their opponent moved with blinding speed and caused her whip to shoot out at them with insane speed that tore at the air. The teens barely managed to jump out of the way before the spots in between them was crushed with indiscriminate force. An instant later Shirou's blades had shot out through the air towards his assailant, however his weak counter was blocked by the length of the woman's whip as if she barely noticed it. Before he could even swear though, he had to dodge another lightning-fast strike that once more tore up the asphalt street. To his side he saw Rin shooting off her Gandra curse rapidly, only to be blocked and denied as well before having to dodge the relentless attack as well. Come now. Surely you too can do better than this. The undead woman laughed happily as her weapon danced around her, striking and defending at the same time. Any bright ideas? Rin yelled as she jumped back while shooting off more curses in an attempt to hit the woman. We can't get an opening like this, and she would kill either one of us if it was one-on-one. Shirou grit his teeth as he glared at the woman and her weapon while firing swords at her, buying time so he could give Rin his analysis of the situation. Her attacking range is 15 meters, but in order to safely switch from attacking to defending with our constant assault it's reduced to 7. Her code has a strong resistance to both magic and physical wear. If we continue like this, we're dead. He jumped back quickly to avoid getting shredded. Judging from his current position, he guessed they had another 30 meters before they were cornered by the woman in the alley. If we're going to get out of this, we have to overwhelm her code. I have my jewel, but I don't have enough time to get it out. Rin argued, firing off more shots. I'll make some then. The faker yelled as he stupidly ran forward so that he was between the two females and conjured several more blades that fired off rapidly while at the same time barely managing to deflect the few heavy blows that barely reached him. His eyes could barely follow the tip of the whip as he countered as many strikes as he could with blades in his hands, feeling as if he was hitting a cannonball every time. Slash down with the left arm. Parry with the right. Block to protect the right collar. Twist slightly to prevent direct hit to left thigh. Duck right. Damn, didn't have enough strength and had the flat of the blade hit his head. Duck. Tilt left. Block at the shoulder. Still not enough strength used. Arm was nearly dislocated. Despite Shirou's blatant display of selflessness and swordsmanship, he was getting pushed back and/or injured with each strike he encountered. His style was built for this sort of opponent and situation, but not this particular weapon, and he was outclassed by too much to utilize his suicidal technique at all. Each sword he blocked with shattered in his hands, only to be replaced by another copy a split second later to block another strike of the serpent-like whip. He had reinforced his clothing and his body to high levels the moment the fighting began. However, it still did little to prevent his limbs and ribs from feeling like they were pushed to the breaking point every time he was hit with a glancing blow that he occasionally missed. He didn't bother to wonder what would have happened to his person if he didn't have the extra protection when they hit. Shirou, you idiot. What the hell do you think you're? Rin's shout of shock and rage was interrupted as she had to avoid an attack that managed to get past the red-headed meat shield. Protecting the princess, are we? Laughed the woman as she did not slow down in the slightest. And here I thought that chivalry was dead. You certainly are making an impressive stand for a mere child. Several quick flicks of her wrist enabled her to give the boy some glancing blows that caused him to cry out in pain while still managing to keep the girl behind him too busy moving to do anything about it. It was obvious that she was still playing around. It's a shame that shooting swords at me is the only thing you are good at, boy. She paused as she heard a soft chuckling coming from the boy. Strange. I don't think I hit your head yet. She mused and stopped attacking, if only to get a better view of her opponent seemingly going insane in front of her. You're right about one thing, lady. Shirou laughed as almost double the normal amount of swords suddenly appeared behind him compared to his previous salvos. I really am only good at shooting swords. Without warning, the small crest on the boy's chest glowed fiercely. Excel. He yelled fiercely as the weapons above him bolted at his opponents at speeds that dwarfed their predecessors and surprised everyone else there. The air between the two became the speedway for flying swords that tore the air so violently that all three could hear each individual blade of metal cut through the atmosphere as it made its way to impale its target. Fast. Hissed the eldest one there with narrowed eyes as she quickly maneuvered her whip to deflect the oncoming storm of swords, for once having difficulty keeping up as each projectile was significantly harder to track than anything else thrown at her so far. If that were not enough, the additional speed provided a boost in concussive force for each of the flying tools, causing her beloved code to lose momentum and make her focus completely on defense. Rin. Hurry up already. Shirou yelled impatiently as he felt the consequences of manipulating time on so many swords at once. It felt as if the 3 circuits on his chest were burning a hole into his chest so deep that his heart felt like it was being marked by the crest. Every breath he let out was visible to the naked eye as his body temperature skyrocketed by his efforts. And that was the pain without the partially crushed ribs from his assailant's first blow. Magic beyond one's capabilities would kill the caster. That was one of the fundamental rules that magi taught their students. Shirou was firing off roughly 30 swords at roughly double the acceleration and velocity that Gaia would normally read them being shot off at. His personal best until that moment had been 9. Alright. The girl stammered as she realized that she finally had time to move without worrying about getting killed, and reached into her pocket for one of the jewels that she had been storing prana in every night since her father died. Grasping the sapphire in her fist and taking aim, the Tosaka shouted the German aria needed to trigger the massive stores of power inside the stone and unleash a massive blast of pure energy to turn the tide of the battle. There was no element to the attack, only pure force in the shape of an amorphous light the size of a large car that barreled down the alleyway without discrimination, barely missing Shirou in the process. Despite being clearly above human capabilities, the vampiress was hard-pressed to find a means of escape without exposing herself to the flying swords. Seeing as she had no other option, the woman quickly twitched her arm and channeled her energies in a fashion such that her weapon retracted and coiled upon itself to form a shield large enough to protect her just as Rin's attack reached its target. The entire alleyway burst with light as the attack met its target with unrelenting force and a deafening collision, so much so that neither Shirou nor Rin could tell what had happened to their opponent. No doubt someone would have probably felt something even if the vampiress had set up a field to contain any noises and disturbances in the area. Rin panted heavily as the air in the area settled. That should have done it. She breathed out heavily as she looked at Shirou, who was still hunched over and breathing at least 3 times as hard as she was. Heh, you look like shit. Serves you right for doing something so stupid as to try to hold her off alone. Any other comment she would have made, however, died in her throat as her danger senses screamed at her, and she slowly turned her attention back to the destruction where a very malevolent figure was standing in the middle of the rubble with glowing red eyes. You, little fucks. She growled angrily with an inhuman voice that reverberated between the buildings. Looking down in front of her, she glared not at the teens but at the smoldering cord of what looked like broken-up charcoal, which both assumed was the remains of the tool that had been just moments before almost crushing them to death. The person in front of them was no longer someone that merely thought of them as entertainment. It was a demon that was fully set on making them suffer. That was my favorite weapon. Faster than the stunned Rin could follow, she dashed towards her with inhuman speed, with one warped clawed hand ready to tear her into pieces. In less time than the younger female expected, her soon-to-be killer was right in front of her, and in striking distance. Time slowed down for Rin as she absorbed the terrifying sight in front of her. She was going to die. This was a fact that echoed in her mind relentlessly. Rin Tosaka as of this moment was incapable of fighting against this monstrosity and was going to die. As soon as the next 10 feet was covered, she would be a bloody mess all over the ground. She wouldn't have her blood sucked. She wouldn't be tortured. She would simply be tossed like the small individual that she was. As a magus, she had come to accept that she could die in such a manner years ago, but as a young teenage girl and living being she screamed in protest that she was going to die before accomplishing anything in her life. She was so preoccupied with her dilemma that she almost didn't notice when Shirou, just as quickly as her assailant, appeared between them with a bow in hand and drawn back with a silvery transparent spiraled sword glowing fiercely, notched, pulled back and aimed right between the bloodsucker's shocked red eyes, his own fiercely calm and focused onto the point of impact. Let me show you one of mine. A second blast of explosive prana crashed into the shrieking woman and forced her to go flying in the opposite direction with a colorless light at speeds that clearly indicated how dangerous his bow and arrow combination was. If Rin's unleashed gem was akin to a bazooka with a huge blast radius and hit area, Shirou's bow and arrow was comparable to a sniper rifle with a shotgun spread, where anything hit was either pierced completely or shot back with relentless force. Out of the alley, down another, and 3 more blocks before a distant but notable crash was heard, followed by multiple car alarms and things falling. Rin stood there speechless as her brain slowly caught up to what her eyes had witnessed. What the hell was that? She stammered as she finally found her voice and looked at the taller teen standing in front of her, and watched as he collapsed onto his knees breathing harshly. Ether, element, sword. The boy panted, each word accompanied by a cloud of steam from his mouth. Poured, all, my prana, into it, almost, didn't make it. Rin blinked in confusion. Ether was the fifth of the 5 base elements that a magi was normally aligned to, the others being earth, wind, water and fire. The fifth imaginary element according to the teachings of the Mages Association, it combines itself with any of the other 4 elements in order to actualize the mysteries of thaumaturgy. Although amorphous and incapable of materializing by its own power, it is what allows shapeless bodies to take a material form. Its domains were among the lines of composition, dissolution, modification, separation, unification, spiritual bodies, conceptual weapons and others. From what Rin saw, she could guess that Shirou's modified and charged arrow simultaneously decomposed and recomposed itself into a massive blast of prana with incredible force due to being shot from a modified bow. It was an honestly brilliant and terrifying maneuver if she were to be honest, more so when she recalled how quick the boy managed to project both the bow and the sword, modified the sword, set it up, and got into position from where he had been lying just moments before. Since when the hell could you make something like? She began to start irritably before shaking her head. Never mind. We have to make sure that the bitch is actually down for good. Don't drop your guard for a second. Shirou panted as he slowly pushed himself up. I can't save you again, like this. Rin clenched her fists as she silently admitted that she would have been killed multiple times already if it weren't for Shirou's aid and experience. Not only had he been able to hold his own against the woman far more efficiently than she would have, but she herself had nearly been torn to shreds like a rookie magi with her head up her ass twice within the past 5 minutes. Humph. Who said I needed your help, Emiya? I just waited to see what you were capable of doing since I knew you were too much of a bleeding heart to let me get hurt. She brushed her hair to the side and walked away. If I find you here when I get back, don't expect me to drag your pathetic ass back to your place. You're welcome. Shirou laughed painfully, holding his chest and ribs as he did so and stumbled till he was leaning heavily against a wall, not even paying attention as Rin walked away to do some damage control. His body was burning, his limbs were heavy as lead before he used the bow, so he didn't even know if he even had arms at this point. His heart felt like it was seared, his lungs were always empty, more than a few bones were bruised or at least fractured, he was out of OD, and close to passing out. All in all, from what he's heard, he managed to do fairly well for his first vampire encounter gone wrong. Oh, Norway. Sirius grunted in irritation as he examined the metal in front of him with a sharp eye. He had been working on Louv's pet project for a few days now, and to be honest he was actually getting into it. He didn't like the fact that he was helping out an egotistical man who killed people for the sake of doing so, but he'd be damned if he said that he wasn't somewhat of trying to make something new. His previous ultimate anti-magus weapons really were little challenge for him to make since the materials he used did most of the work, but starting from scratch he was interested in seeing how far he could get. He knew what results he would need to make this final weapon, but he didn't know how to get it to happen or if he could. It's quite interesting to see you in action. Louv mused from the entrance of the study where Sirius was examining his materials. Many wouldn't believe that one such as yourself was the research type, especially with that name you earned yourself back in your heyday. What was it again? Tay called me Ta Divergin Golem. Sirius replied without turning away from the material he was examining. Tough, I doubt anyone oder tan ta geezers toddy know about tat. Was it that long ago? The vampire chuckled. I must admit, when you are my age, time does seem to pass rather quickly at times. Though I am curious to see how you earned that name in the first place. He drank some wine elegantly before continuing his conversation. The Golem. Jewish mythology, if I am not mistaken. One of the oldest legends too, depending on which story you follow, though the most famous one known currently is roughly my age. He scratched his beard curiously. I wonder if the original was ever discovered. It would certainly be an immensely powerful artifact should it still exist. It was a well-known fact that the older an object or being of magical nature was, the more potent magic it possessed. The phantasmal races were a prime example of that, but the oldest ones alive today had ages only spanned to the centuries. If the original golem existed, it would no doubt be at least 2 millennia in age. Sirius nodded in agreement, admitting he studied up on the subject himself. If it was found, you'd bet your arse ta church has it. No doubt. Louvre nodded. Those annoying priests always did have a habit of gunning for Middle Eastern-based relics in their spare time. He walked to the larger man. So how long will it take for you to finish my order? I am of course well aware of how tedious the creation, testing and stabilizing process can be for codes, yet I do wish to know a rough estimate. Sirius glanced at the vampire before chuckling. You know as well as I do tat tears no such thing as a true anti-magus weapon Louvre. Sure tier are one's tat can put things in your favor, but thaumaturgy is so diversified nowadays tat it's impossible to cover every approach tatya can be attacked by. Tis includes those special codes I mentioned earlier. He put down the metal on the table in front of him and leaned back. Tat isn't ta say ahm and not trying ta make you some good stuff, but if you truly want ta have all your bases covered, you're gonna have ta settle fair a fairly large set o codes ta save your skin. He began to list off various branches of magic. Puppeteers, familiar users, elementalists, alchemists, telekinetics, spiritualists, mentalists, alchemists, standard enforcers, noble phantasms, conceptual weapons, scriptures. He shook his head. Too many ways ta get killed these days. It's ta reason I brushed up on my bounded fields when I retired. Area effects help out a lot. He smirked. Although I guess that's what you're trying to achieve eventually, ain't it? Your own reality marble. Lou frowned, not liking the not-so-subtle jab the Irishman gave him. I admit that my request is rather unreasonable to assume that a single weapon will suffice, however you still have yet to answer me. How long before I can start to get results? Sirius snorted before reaching into a pocket and tossing the man a ring covered in runes. Tier. A code tat protects you from anyone tat tries to perform any mind or sensory altering spells on you and reflects it at tenfold. Automatically uses your prana when activated tough it barely uses any tin to begin with. And when I mean any spells, I bloody well mean it. Consider it part 1 of Ta McGinty set. Humph. The vampire grunted as he examined the loop of metal in his hands curiously. It is a start, though a bit bland for my tastes. I am a weaponsmith, not a bloody jeweler. Kidnap an Edelfelt if you want it ta shine all ta colors of ta rainbow. Sirius grumbled as he got back to his work. So what did you come here for? No you're not ta type ta start giving me house calls after not even a week's past. Yes how silly of me. Louvre chuckled as he turned to the larger of the two again. It seems as if my son's efforts turned out to be fruitful after all. The room suddenly became very tense, not that either men physically showed it. Indeed, I was surprised myself when I heard of how surprisingly simple things were. He actually found it? Sirius swallowed, his mouth suddenly dry. On one hand, he had a chance to examine a noble phantasm other than Fragarak, something he never expected to happen in his lifetime, well that is until Shirou got through the Grail War in one piece. On the other, it was in the hands of the guy that kidnapped him. Well, shit. He said, summing up his situation rather accurately. Louvre smirked as he walked away. I'll tell my son that you are also impressed by his achievements. Continue to impress me and I might even allow you to hold it when he gets here. Emiya estate. The first thought that crossed Shirou's mind when he woke up that morning was that he must have sparred with Bazette and lost horrendously before he fell asleep because his body was killing him. His limbs hurt without moving, his lungs burned, his chest screamed with each breath he took, and he had a headache that was bad enough that he didn't even want to think at the moment. It was because of this that it took him a while to remember what exactly happened, or not. He recalled fighting a vampire using a mystic code, going up against it, being thoroughly tenderized, Rin using her jewel, him getting in that last shot, and then trying to get back home. And that's where he drew a blank. Shirou couldn't tell for the life of him how he got back home, and he knew for a fact he was home since he was in the middle of the bounded fields that he, Waver, Sirius, and his father had set up. He couldn't mistaken the spells surrounding the Emiya estate for anything else. Trace, on. He muttered as he scanned himself. While he could scan virtually everything else without his aria, he needed the extra push to do a full self-body scan since he couldn't see every part of his body naturally. 5 ribs bruised, 1 fractured, 1 arm fractured, 1 tibia bruised, and several half-healed cuts. He wasn't going to bother with how many muscles of his were strained to the point of needing to see a doctor if he was a normal human. Damn. I really overdid it this time. He chuckled dryly as he slowly and painfully picked himself up and put his good arm to his leg and chanted a quick healing spell that Rin taught him. It was fairly weak, but it would at least get most of his injuries to the halfway point in terms of getting healed. He'd let Avalon take care of the rest and be at full health by the end of the week. He was able to slightly accelerate the noble phantasm's ability to regenerate his body, but it was really only good for light bruises and cuts. Deep injuries like the ones he had now would take too long to get his body to an adequate level of health, well that and he had a tendency to glow like a firefly whenever he used the sheath. It took almost an entire hour, but Shirou had managed to return himself to a condition that he felt would not prevent him from doing everyday tasks. He definitely would refrain from doing anything strenuous for a few days, especially when it came to his magic crest, but he felt fine for the most part as he picked himself up and began to walk to the door. Everything was moving slower. He could hear his blood as it ran through his ears and mind. He could feel his bones as they grinded against one another in their joints. His breathing could be sectioned off into individual spasms and clumps of air as they filled the tiny sacs that permeated his lungs. Everything looked darker now as he watched himself lose control of his body and slowly stumble against the wall next to his door, his sense of time returning to normal and his breathing suddenly becoming much deeper than it was just moments before and his chest hurting in ways and places that no doctor could describe or diagnose. This sensation, despite its alien-like qualities, was not something that Shirou was new to. He had overused and overextended himself when it came to his time thaumaturgy again. Despite the fact that what he had adjusted was his projected weapons, he always seemed to suffer some kind of mental feedback whenever he pushed himself too far in this field. Luckily he knew the after-effects were temporary and would probably go away after a few days. Unfortunately he never pushed himself quite this far before, so he doesn't know how badly he will be affected or how frequent these pseudo-seizures will be. The worst ones were when his sense of time slowed down and everything around him seemed to speed up tremendously. He hated it when that happened. Taking in several deep breaths, Shirou regained control of himself. There was no point in worrying when his next spasm was. He would deal with it when it came, not that he had any other choice in the matter. Regaining composure, the teen looked at his clock. It was already 11:30 am. 11:30. The redhead yelled in surprise and shock as he gave the clock a double take. Even if he was out cold, Sakura or Taiga would have come to wake him up by at least 7. He was so late for school it wasn't even funny. Within less than 2 minutes the teen had managed to put on a clean set of his school uniform before bolting through his house, grabbing his books, passing by Sakura, Rin, and Taiga in the living room, running out the front door, and out onto the street before screeching to a halt. No. He muttered to himself in disbelief and fear as his brain caught up to him and he slowly turned back to look at his front door suspiciously. It couldn't be. Slowly walking back to the entrance of his home, the boy examined everything around him with utmost scrutiny. If someone was playing a joke on him, they were not only well-informed, but extremely skilled to pull off such an illusion in Ho's own home, in addition to being purely sadistic. He wouldn't be surprised if Sirius showed up for a surprise visit. Peeking his head into the living room again suspiciously and on guard, Shirou spied on the three females in his living room, all staring back at him as if they had been expecting him. "Told you he was dense." Taiga chuckled, although the standard light-heartedness that she normally had was surprisingly weak. "Should I be scared right now?" the redhead asked warily, still hiding from the other side of the doorway. While Taiga was rather amused, he noticed that Sakura was surprisingly depressed at the moment from the way she was holding herself, or not, and Rin had that look that said that something was bothering her even if she was pretending not to acknowledge it. "And if not, can someone please explain to me why? You know, you must be the only teenage boy I know that's scared stiff when you realize that three beautiful females such as ourselves appear in your living room." Taiga huffed as if insulted. "Senpai. That is." Sakura stumbled over her words while periodically glancing at Rin nervously. Rin on the other hand was more direct. "Don't you remember Emiya-kun? We came across one another last night when that terrorist set off those bombs in town." "Terrorist?" Shirou blinked as he tried to figure out what Rin was talking about. "Bombs? That freak that's been kidnapping people lately decided to take things up a notch." Taiga grimaced. "He set off a bunch of bombs last night and caused some serious damage. Schools are cancelled for now while the police are running around trying to figure out what's going on. Even Gramps was asked to help them out. Word is they still haven't caught whoever's responsible for it either." Rin shot Shirou a meaningful glare that he understood at once. Despite their efforts, the vampiress wasn't killed by his last attack and is still running around. "I see." Shirou frowned as he looked at the three again. "But that doesn't explain why the heck you're in my home, Tosaka." Rin pouted. "Humph. Is that the way you thank the person who went out of her way to lug your unconscious body back to your home? Now Tosaka-san, you know he doesn't know what happened." Taiga tried to placate Rin. "He doesn't remember since he was knocked out from the blast. You told us that yourself." The first-class magus brushed her hair back. "It was a bit rude of me, but since my guardian is off doing whatever the heck he's doing, I didn't feel comfortable trying to get to home alone after what happened, and since Emiya-kun's home is so big and no one is here, I figured I could steal a room for the night and apologize in the morning." She opened an eye and looked at Taiga and Sakura. "I didn't expect for company to arrive so early though. We got a call from the school shortly after we got here saying that everything was cancelled, which is why Sakura is still in her uniform." Taiga continued with a sigh and leaned back. "Honestly, this thing is getting out of control. When is this guy going to get caught?" "Soon enough, hopefully." Rin frowned. "I should really get back home." Sakura mumbled and looked away, as if ashamed to even consider looking at Shirou right now. "The call came after I got here. Grandfather and brother must be worried about me." "No." Shirou replied a bit forcefully without even thinking about it and getting odd looks from the females there. He paused before smiling nervously. "I mean, you're already here and safe, right? There's no need to rush back home when everyone around the area is still running around. You might accidentally get caught up in something. Plus, not to be mean, but I don't think that Shinji is the best person to talk to for comfort." Rin snorted. "Not unless you're an idiot that lives off of shallow compliments anyways." She muttered under her breath. The youngest one there looked at everyone in the room nervously before relenting. I guess I can call up grandfather later and tell him that I'm staying over for the night." Taiga squealed. "Finally some progress." "What?" the teens asked the adult in the room, confused. "Nothing." The future teacher looked away with a cat-like grin before grabbing a very confused Sakura. "Okay. The ice is getting broken. Sakura, come with me and we can start planning for your next step. You finally have some momentum going and we are going to ride it for as long as we can. First we're going to make a list of what you need to get from your home and then." Rin and Shirou blinked as they listened to Taiga's ranting die down as she went to a farther part of the estate to talk to Sakura privately. Any idea what the heck that was about? Rin asked. Not in the slightest. Shirou replied before shaking his head and turning back to the girl. Never mind her, what about the vampire? She isn't dead? No. The Tosaka grimaced. It didn't take me long to get to where she landed, but when I arrived there was no sign of her body. She crossed her arms and sighed. That means she's still alive and around. Good news is that I doubt she'll be trying a direct approach again anytime soon. She glared at the boy suspiciously. Speaking of the damage we did to her though, when the hell were you going to tell me that you could make an ether element sword? Shirou looked away sheepishly. I didn't think it was important at the time. Rin covered her face with a hand and sighed. Next you're going to tell me that you can make one of the other 4 elements too. Pretty much. The faker replied as one by one he produced a sword that was enchanted with each element and laid them down in front of the progressively irritated girl. They were all identical save for their coloring and the runes on the flat of each blade. They take more time and energy to make compared to the normal swords I make, so I don't use them much other than for specialized arrows. Each one gives my shots a different ability with some interesting effects. He pointed to the dull silver sword that possessed the ether element. This is the one I used last night. It's the most powerful and destructive of the bunch, but it takes up too much prana for me to use that often. He looked up to see Rin glaring at him angrily. What did I do this time? You mean to tell me? She started off slowly. That so long as it's in the shape of a sword and you have seen the original, you are theoretically capable of recreating any mystery to near perfection without using a medium or any additional external sources of prana or information, bypassing the years and years of training, the required element, knowledge, and education that it would normally take for virtually any other mage to even think of producing such an object. Shirou gulped as he saw Rin considering blowing his head off right then and there. Theoretically. He admitted. But these swords here are really basic. I wouldn't be surprised if you could make them yourself. I just reinforced the element to make them stronger. Rin's eyebrow began to twitch before she gave up and collapsed onto the couch next to her. You are so lucky. I need you to fight that vampire or I would dissect you on the spot. She mumbled under her breath. Wait, if it takes you so long to make those things, how the hell did you make the one from last night so fast? You were nearly out when she was about to gut me, unless... She paused and looked at him dangerously. You were faking it and using me as bait, weren't you? The faker stepped back nervously. Well, I was trained not to let down my guard until the enemy was confirmed dead. I just kind of expected you to have the same idea as well, but because you weren't, she went after you and ignored me completely until the last moment, so, it all worked out for the best? He smiled weakly as the female in front of him glared at him with progressively increasing amounts of rage, before it all went away and a calm and happy smile dawned itself on her face. He felt safer when she was filled with rage. You're absolutely right, Emiya-kun. Rin replied with a sweet facade. Since that's the case, I think that after this mess is settled with, you should train me a bit in these combat tactics that you seem to be so adept at using. As expected of Tosaka. Shirou shivered. Without even trying, she makes it sound like I'm the one that's going to be trained. Rin's grin dropped quickly though. Your punishment aside though, we have another thing to discuss. She frowned. Why are you letting Mato stay here? Please don't tell me you actually can't tell that she's... I've known her longer than I've known you. Shirou replied. We've known about one another for years, but we didn't even acknowledge that we were magi until about a week ago when I had to take out a few ghouls in front of her. He paused before looking away. Personally though, I just want to keep her away from that grandfather of hers. He shivered. He isn't human. You think I don't know there's something weird about him? Rin raised an eyebrow. Our families have been aware of one another for generations. Of course I know that the man uses odd magic to keep his body alive. That isn't alive, Tosaka. Shirou shivered. Advanced structural grasping, remember? His body only looks human. On the inside though, to be honest, I have an easier time looking at the undead than I did looking at him. He swallowed heavily. The worst part is that whatever makes up his body, there's some in Sakura's too. Rin's face momentarily paled before looking away ashamed, apparently showing that she knew more about the subject than she let on, but Shirou's observations confirmed her worst assumptions. I know you feel helpless about this, but there's nothing you can do about it now. It's how her family passes down their secrets, no matter how disgusting it may seem. She sighed. Look. I guess I can let you be around her, but don't make this a habit, Emiya-kun. If you let the wrong magus learn too much about you, you'll find yourself being taken advantage of and be forced to do distasteful things, but then again I'm already doing that to you, aren't I? She smiled weakly before regaining her composure. We can talk about that stuff later. For now we need to focus ourselves on the task at hand. The bitch last night said that she was after you in particular. Are you sure you don't have any idea why? The boy shook his head. Rin was right again about Sakura. He didn't like it, but he also knew that it didn't take priority at the moment. He could ask Rin about what she knew about his other magus friend later. Unless Dad pissed her off at some point, no, but even then it did sound like she was working for someone else, didn't it? Rin nodded. Yeah, it did. She put a hand to her mouth. Plus it was weird that she was using a mystic code. Most dead apostles don't use weapons and rely on magic, plus hers was a strong code too. It was destroyed in the end, but it managed to prevent the bulk of my jewel's attack from hitting her even though it wasn't built for defense. It really was a high-quality weapon. She glanced at her partner and noted the look of realization on his face. You remember something? One of my family members from England that I told you about. He started slowly. His name is Sirius McGinty. Soon after I got back from vacation I got word that he disappeared but that there was reason to believe he was alive. He gave Rin a worried look. He's known as the best mystic code maker in the association bar none. Rin connected the dots together immediately. So they're trying to use you to get him to do what they want. She concluded before throwing him a small smirk. Too bad they didn't do their homework on you, otherwise the bitch would have brought some bigger weapons to deal with the son of the magus killer. Stop comparing me to my dad. Shirou grunted as he took out his cell and began to go through his contacts. We have completely different goals in life. Doesn't look like it to me. The female muttered under her breath before eyeing the phone. You actually use one of those things? Who are you calling anyways? One of my other relatives. Shirou answered as he found Waver's number. He's a lord in the association and is in charge of finding Sirius GG. A lord? Rin gaped in shock. You are related to a lord? She paused for a moment. And he actually owns one of those stupid things? He's also likes to play Final Fantasy and Dynasty Warriors in his spare time. Shirou replied without thinking as the phone rang by his ears, not paying attention to Rin letting her jaw drop. She didn't play video games really, but even she recognized some of the most popular franchises in the subject. Come on. He muttered under his breath as he waited for the man to answer, only to no avail as the answering message played. Damn. He muttered under his breath as he began to press a sequence of numbers on the phone and channeled prana into his fingers. What are you doing now? Rin asked curiously. It's a spell that Sirius GG came up with that he put into all our cells. Shirou answered as he put the phone to his head again. It sends the message that I'm about to record not only to his phone, but to every piece of communications equipment he owns that is connected to this spell as well so he won't miss it. He cleared his throat. Waver and I. It's Shirou. I think we might have a lead to who took the old man. Problem is that I think they're after me too and I just pissed them off with one of my arrows. I don't know how much longer it will take for them to come after me for real again. Get back to me as soon as you can. I don't know how far my luck can take me the next time. Hope to talk to you soon. He closed the phone and sighed. Well, a fat load of help that did. Rin muttered. A lord actually using one of those things. She shook her head. I'm going to go back home and get some stuff. Hopefully by the time I'm done I'll be able to actually make sense of all this crap. Stuff? Shirou blinked. You mean you're coming back? The Tosaka looked at Shirou as if he was stupid. Of course, you idiot. The bitch is gunning for you, so as long as I'm near the bait I can be sure to encounter again sooner or later, and that's when we'll finish her off for good. She turned around. Let's see, other than clothes and books, I'll need my gems and... She began to make a list that grew in proportion to how scared Shirou felt. By the time she left the house Shirou was in a state of dire straits. It was because of this that he immediately did the only thing he could do in order to calm himself down. He made himself a very elaborate brunch. Elsewhere in the city, her body was racked with pain. Every breath, every twitch, every thought, every second, every moment was filled with the throbbing caused by a heart that no longer beat. Her beautiful skin was marred, her beloved clothes were torn, her lustrous hair was frayed, her flawless skin was bruised and cut. She would make them pay. She would make them break. She would drink their blood. Blood, blood, oh was she thirsty. Her servants in the city were few and would not bring her the needed amount of energy for a while, but she would eventually recover and she would eventually have her revenge. She laid in her bed in the private hotel room she had ordered for herself when she arrived, enjoying the luxuries that her father had provided her to the best of her current suffering ability. The curtains, the sheets, the phone, the door, the chair, the lamp, the shower, the TV, the dresser, the fan. She wanted to destroy all of it so badly right now, pretend that all the splinters were blood and soak herself in the remains as if it was a nice refreshing bath. Slowly she reached for a small jewel on her dresser and picked it up. It weighed no more than any other trinket, but in her current state it may as well have weighed a good 50 pounds to get it to her face. Breathing heavily, the woman channeled some of her energy into the small piece of thaumaturgy and watched it glow a bright purple. Daddy! She muttered weakly, ashamed that she had been reduced to this state and lost her favorite weapon. I need your help. Chapter 13, Field Work. I do not own Fate/Stay Night and stuffs. Norway. Waver sat in his apartment room lying on his bed and staring at his cell phone irritably. It had been a couple of days since he had managed to get the 100-man army ready to take down Louvre and move everyone to the nearest city to where the vampire's supposed castle was. The air was cold. The food was mediocre at best, the board was small, so many of those under his command had to share rooms which obviously didn't settle well for some of the old bloods, and like the fool that he was, he let his guard down and assumed that things were going well for once. And then he checked his cell for messages. I knew things weren't going to be easy. He muttered. But there should have been a limit to how bad this all can progress in such a short amount of time. He sighed. I doubt even Kiritsugu had to deal with targets on opposite ends of the planet at once before. A knock at the door broke him out of his musings. None of the bounded fields he set up in the area were triggered, so it was probably the person he sent for. It's open. He spoke loud enough for the person on the other side to hear. The door opened to let in Bazette, who looked at him curiously. You wanted to see me, Lord Elmeloy? Forget the formal crap, Baz. The Lord sighed. I'm not in the mood to deal with formalities right now. The Fraga frowned and pouted. She had been getting over serious kidnapping for a while, but she still didn't fare well with additional stress at the moment. Fine then, Waver, what do you want? I hope you aren't going to try and flirt with me the few days before we storm the castle, because it won't work. The man snorted. You'd break me in half anyways. He sighed, knowing that he was likely going to get punched across town if he didn't deliver his news right. Besides, you're not joining us in raiding Louvre's castle. The room was dead quiet for several seconds. Care to say that again, my lord? The enforcer asked in a dangerously calm tone. Waver sat up and looked at the girl apologetically. I've just made the call. You're getting on a flight at 8 tomorrow morning heading to Japan. Once there you're to take the valet that's waiting for you and go to your main assignment. And what, dare I ask, is in Japan that is related to our current objective? The purple-haired woman continued to speak in a borderline murderous tone. The lord shook his head and took out his cell phone, pressed the button that would make it go on speaker, and then played the message so that the girl could hear. Waver and I. It's Shirou. I think we might have a lead to who took the old man. Problem is that I think they're after me too, and I just pissed them off with one of my arrows. I don't know how much longer it will take for them to come after me for real again. Get back to me as soon as you can. I don't know how far my luck can take me the next time. Hope to talk to you soon. You see our problem now? Waver asked with a dark tone. Bazette grit her teeth. You can't. I mean, why not someone else? The elder finished her sentence. Come on. You know why I can't trust anyone else to help him out. Not after they learn who his father is, but that's no reason for you to just dump me on him when we're so close to the castle. She argued. I'm one of the strongest fighters here. I know we both like him, but we can't sacrifice our odds just for some kid. I have 99 other men to pick up the slack. Waver countered as he sat up and leaned towards her darkly. Unfortunately, Shirou isn't just some boy, and there is another reason why I am sending you. He looked at her dead in the eyes. How do you think the magus killer managed to take out so many of his targets so efficiently? Surely you don't think he could have dealt with all of those magi relying on just guns, explosives, poison and experience, do you? Other than his mind, he must have had something else, something special. Bazette frowned for several seconds before the answer formed in her mind. A mystic code. She whispered in realization. Waver nodded. And one of the most dangerous ones that Sirius has ever made. The only people who know how it works and its true potential are the boy, me and Sirius. Bus should Louvre manage to get inside the old man's head, he'll find out about it and go straight for it. Shirou knows where it is, but he will never use it. It's not his kind of weapon. However, if Louvre were to ever find out about its existence, the consequences would be catastrophic. Waver looked down with a tired expression on his face. In addition to that particular tool, there is another weapon in the Emiya home that must be kept away from Louvre at all times as well, that you need to be responsible for. Bazette stood still as she repeatedly went over the information she had learned in her head. The code of the magus killer. If such a weapon existed and was as dangerous as Waver claimed, then it was no wonder he was trusting her with this job. And yet, there was another weapon that needed to be guarded with equal scrutiny as well. Go on. She said in a calm and controlled tone. The Lord sighed. Kiritsugu designed a set of weapons when he died for Shirou to have, which the old man made. Sirius and I gave them to him along with some other things in a box that wasn't to open for another year thanks to a spell of my design. However, with the current situation I don't think we will have that time. He looked at the woman with cold eyes. Should you arrive and see that the situation has regressed to a point where it is getting unlikely that you will be able to manage yourselves, I want you to get Shirou to show you where he hid the box and open it. Once Shirou has managed to show that he can trace all of them perfectly, destroy them such that not even the dust can be used. The enforcer blinked in surprise. Are they that dangerous? I mean, if we can just hide them. We can't risk it. Waver interrupted. Absolutely out of the question. I'd rather fight the White Princess herself by myself than leave those tools somewhere where an idiot can grab hold of them. Bazette swallowed heavily as she began to understand how truly severe the situation really was. What does Shirou need them for? I mean, he's just the kid of a guy you knew, isn't he? He's a bit different and special, but the Lord remained quiet for a while. That is on a need-to-know basis, he replied with a hint of fear. But rest assured when I say it is not against the interests of the association in the slightest. He put his head in his hands. I need you to trust me on this, Baz. You're the only one I can trust with this. You and your noble phantasm. The young woman looked down on her friend and boss with a stern expression. If this is all for nothing, I'm not going to let you live this down, you know this, right? Waver chuckled dryly. If he isn't in either location, the Queen will kill me, so unfortunately you're just going to have to settle for my corpse if I'm wrong. He shook his head. Ah, such is the life of a magus. Death at every turn. It really was a pathetic excuse for his current actions, however nothing else seemed to fit his current situation more perfectly at the moment. Reaching into his dark red coat, he took out a piece of paper and handed it to the girl. Written here are the addresses for where you need to go, where you will be staying, and above all else, the verbal password to unlock the box. Don't forget any of them. Bazette nodded and took the paper before turning to leave the room. You owe me for this one, Waver. She honestly didn't know what to think of the situation. On the one hand, she was being left out of a dead apostle ancestor hunt, which would have done wonders for her resume for future battles. On the other hand, if Waver's intuition was right, then not only was she going to fight the vampire anyways, but she would be doing so with only Shirou at her back against the monster, with the assumption that whatever Sirius made for him would be enough to hopefully turn the tables. Groaning to herself, the woman walked to her room to pack her things, ignoring the other enforcers that she passed on the way there, and began to memorize the paper. What kind of password is this? Japan. I really don't see why I can't cook. Shirou muttered as he sat in his living room sulking and glancing at the opening to the kitchen every few seconds. Your body is still recovering from the attack, senpai. Sakura apologized as she looked at the boy covered in random patches and bandages. When Shirou made the soothing breakfast for himself the morning after the vampire fight, he had accidentally overstrained his previously pushed to the limit muscles despite the brief healing he had given himself minutes prior. This resulted in a cramp that possessed his entire person when he sat down to eat. It was apparently so bad he couldn't even finish a third of his meal before admitting that he needed help. Because of that, Sakura and Rin had been alternating cooking duties. Both had initially attempted to claim monopoly over all the meals in the home while they were there, but Shirou and Taiga managed to get them to settle for alternating meals. Much to the surprise of Shirou, Taiga, and Sakura. Rin happened to be a very good chef. Lunch will be out soon. Rin called from the kitchen in a happy tone. Can I at least clean the dishes this time? Shirou asked while sulking like a child. Cleaning and cooking a meal were very soothing for him, and with the current situation he was in, he really needed something to calm his mind down before he'd lose it. No means no, senpai. Sakura frowned, crossing her arms and scolding him despite the fact that she was younger than he was. We don't want you to hurt yourself again. The male looked at his friend surprised before chuckling in defeat. Fine, you win. He winced as his ribs moved, still not fully healed. At least you're back to normal. The girl tilted her head to the side, confused. Back to normal? What do you mean, senpai? Shirou leaned back and let out a breath of air slowly in response to his aching muscles. I mean, you seemed a bit jitterish lately. I mean, with the vampires and everything. And I kinda did force you to sleep over here, then when Tosaka suddenly stayed over. He laughed dryly. I'd be just as jumpy as you, I guess, if I didn't feel so tired. Sakura looked away momentarily before responding. Yeah. I really don't know how to handle knowing that vampires are around now, plus my abilities are pretty much useless for combat, unlike you and Tosaka-senpai. Something in her voice hinted that she was really thinking about something else, but Shirou didn't push things. Things were tense enough that he didn't want to make things worse right now. Hey, don't worry yourself. He smiled gently. I focused most of my training in combat-based magic, and Tosaka. He paused. Well, lunch is ready. Rin announced happily as she came out of the kitchen with various dishes that she produced from the boy's stock. As expected, it all looked and smelled delicious. She's just good at things. The boy concluded reluctantly. Rin's smile was tinged with a small blush as she put everything down. I think I know why you like to cook for others so much, Emiya-kun. It's nice to be appreciated for doing things well. A small scowl dawned her face. The only other person I've ever cooked for is that damned priest, and I don't want anything to do with what goes in or out of his mouth. I figured. Shirou winced as he attempted to serve himself. The pain was so great that appeared to slow down dramatically at some point. Senpai, let me help you with that. Sakura stepped forward to help out the boy and took the plate from his hands and began to fill his plate with moderate amounts of the dish, pretending to ignore the slightly irritated look Rin was giving her with her puffed-out cheeks and narrowed eyes, until she noticed Shirou was still partially stretched over the table and moving slowly. Senpai? Are you okay? Rin noticed what Sakura was concerned about and looked about the boy curiously, and then analytically as she saw his movements. He was slowly retracting his body, but his face was scrunched up in concentration. Emiya-kun? She spoke up and leaned forward. Is something the matter? Something's wrong. Sakura put down the plate and grabbed his shoulders to inspect his person. His body is tensed up and there's something slowing down his body from the inside, an innate bounded field. No one's in here but us. Rin watched Shirou with scrutiny as he slowly made a face that a person normally made when they were caught doing something and began to swear slowly. Apparently this isn't the first time this has happened. She sighed and leaned back looking at the boy analytically. The best thing we can do right now is wait for it to wear off. She began to serve herself some of the food and began to eat slowly as she stared at him with sharp eyes. If I were to take an educated guess, I think it has to do with our fight with the vampire. Sakura's eyes widened. Did she do something to Senpai? Rin shook her head. No. He has a tiny crest on his chest from his dad. He mentioned that it has something to do with time manipulation. He showed as much when he pushed back the bitch. I guess he must have done too much and is suffering from some kind of after effect. She took a few more bites before continuing. The weird thing was that he was applying it to his projections, so if there were any after effects, then they should have only been on his weapons and not on himself. She put her hand to her mouth, a habit she did when she was thinking or contemplating something. I think it's something we'd have to look more into when all this is over, but if it doesn't go away before we're attacked again it may prove to be a lethal handicap. She looked at Sakura. Do you happen to know anything about this? The youngest there looked away guilty. I only know he's good at projection and reinforcement, and that's only from watching him take down those undead. Senpai and I knew that the other was a magus, but we pretended that wasn't the case since we didn't want to change the way things were between us. She paused for a moment before her eyes widened. Wait, he has a crest from his father? But he's adopted. I know. Rin grunted tiredly. Don't remind me about how many things could have and should have gone wrong with that. Somehow it worked with him. Don't ask me how. He's like me. The purple-haired girl thought as she looked at Shirou, who was slowly alternating between the two as they talked, obviously looking like he was following the conversation. Senpai, can you understand what we're saying? Shirou looked at Sakura curiously before tilting his head to the side confused, pretty much answering the question. Well, that makes things easier for us. Rin mused as she ate another bite of food without much manners, elbows on the table and a bored look in her eyes. Hey Shirou, Sakura likes you. The younger girl's face blushed deep red before looking at the red-headed boy nervously. What? She shouted in a high-pitched tone. Why would you do something like? He can't understand us. Rin grinned mischievously. It's actually kinda fun. She turned to Shirou again. Hey, second rate, I forgot to clean your dishes the last meal I cleaned before putting them away. Sakura gasped, acting as if what Rin just said was just as bad as her revelation of her feelings for the Emiya. Why, you didn't? Did you? Does it matter? Rin raised an eyebrow. Go on. Try it. Sakura mumbled, not sure what to say. Sometimes I take some of the good ingredients from your fridge when you're not looking to make dinner. The Tosaka rolled her eyes. Come on, Sakura, that was lame. Hey Shirou, I accidentally came across that pathetic excuse for a porn collection of yours when I was scouting your home for any mystical artifacts. Your taste stinks. She looked at Sakura, who was gaping at her. What? You look like you never knew that boys had those things at our age before. That is. She looked around frantically before dropping her head. Well. I've seen them too. Rin blinked before snickering. Really? Honestly, he has some weird tastes, right? I mean, those things were old and they were my brother's. She mumbled, ashamed, causing Rin to laugh even harder. He forced them onto senpai a year ago as a joke and bragged about it to me. She looked at the boy there with a resolute expression. If Rin was going to humiliate her, she would just return the favor. I saw Tosaka-senpai staring at you like you were a piece of meat when you were changing yesterday. Rin coughed as her mirth turned to shock. What? She stammered with a faint blush on her face. That's not true. How did, it's a lie. It was when he was meditating and came back from the dojo. Sakura stared at her sister with seemingly all-knowing eyes. He took off his top when he was going to his room and I saw you practically undressing the rest of him with your eyes, senpai. That is. Rin faltered before blushing and turning away. Well, what do you expect? I mean, he's an idiot, but he is good-looking. She paused. Wait, how would you know that I was looking unless? A small grin made its way on her face. You were watching too. So what if I was? Sakura crossed her arms, surprising Rin with her blunt response. I've seen senpai without his shirt occasionally since he sleeps in sometimes and I have to wake him up. I already knew what he looked like. I've never practically undressed him with my eyes like you did though. The elder female flinched. Damn. She muttered, assuming that she could steer the conversation away from herself. In frustration she threw her hands into the air. Okay. I admit it. He's kinda cute. Sometimes I consider asking, or forcing him out with me, but then he says something stupid and then I get pissed off. Happy? She breathed heavily before looking at Sakura and realizing what she just claimed. Oh, right. She groaned. Sakura liked him too, and so once more the two girls were stuck in a situation where only one would be happy while the other would be left alone. It's okay. Sakura mumbled as she looked down and to the side. I'm used to it. A massive lance of guilt pierced through Rin's chest, and for good reason. Sakura, her sister in blood, was practically sold off to the Mato family when they were kids. She never knew what exactly Zoken did to her for her training, but she knew enough to occasionally thank and curse the root that she was the elder of the two and thus not chosen instead. However, Rin would not let it show, much anyways. She was a Tosaka and she would carry herself as one. Humph, well, that's no fun. I expected you to actually put up a fight for once since you have a better chance to win than I do. That's not true. The younger argued. My body is tainted and impure. If he ever found out. He already does. Rin interrupted before the girl could continue and glanced at the still slowed down Emiya. He's a hack when it comes to most spells, but his structural grasping ability is on a level that books can only theorize if they've even gotten that far. Even if it was by accident. He already knows that your grandfather's familiars are inside your body, although he doesn't know exactly what they are yet. Structural grasping the undead we've been fighting makes him sick, but he claims looking at Zoken makes him want to throw up unconditionally, not that I blame him when I remember the conversations I've had with that old demon. She sighed and began to eat again as if nothing was wrong. Still, despite that, he wants to spend time with you and keep you away from the Matu household. It's stupid and bound to cause problems eventually for everyone, but he's still doing it. I'm almost jealous. Senpai. Sakura stumbled over her words as she stared at Rin disbelievingly, but then was distracted as a gasp for air distracted the two girls instantly so they could focus on Shirou again. Senpai. She squeaked in surprise as Shirou almost collapsed onto the table breathing heavily. About time you got back to normal. Rin snorted, pretending as if the past 10 minutes didn't happen. Care to explain what happened? It had something to do with your crest, didn't it? Shirou didn't respond immediately as his gasps for air continued for a few more seconds. When I overuse it or push too far. He breathed out. My perception of time occasionally speeds up or slows down for a while. It goes on for a few days after I use the magic. He cringed as his body's physical pains compounded on itself as his mind caught up to its current condition. My body doesn't change though, so it's like I'm trapped in it without being able to control what it does completely. Rin looked at him analytically for a few seconds before sighing and walking to the other side of the table so that she was next to him and forced him to sit up straight, causing him to yell in pain. Senpai? What are you doing? Sakura yelped in surprise and worry as she held Shirou's body to prevent him from being moved suddenly again. Rin responded by picking up some food with her chopsticks and holding it up in front of the boy's surprised face. You're in such crappy shape right now that you obviously can't feed yourself. She puffed out her cheeks. Like it or not, you're the strongest one here. If you're in bad shape, all of us are in trouble and I don't want to call on the priest for help. Don't get the wrong idea or anything, Emiya-kun. Now wait a muffa. Shirou opened his mouth to protest but was interrupted as Rin took the initiative and stuffed the dumpling into his mouth. Stop complaining. If we left eating to you, the meal would be rotting by the time you finished. The brunette stated in a matter-of-fact tone. You wasted enough time with that stupid feedback of yours, no pun intended. If you want me to actually get to healing your wounds today, let me feed you. She looked away with a slight blush before beginning to feed herself on instinct, seemingly unaware that she was using the same chopsticks that she had used to feed Shirou, much to the other two's shock. Did she just? Shirou blinked in disbelief. She. Sakura was at a greater loss of words than Shirou was. Huh? Rin blinked as she noticed the two staring at her bewildered. What? What did I do? The chopsticks. Sakura pointed out slowly. You fed senpai, and then. Rin looked down at the cheap sticks in her hand, then at Shirou, then back to her hand, then at her food, and then apparently managed to put two and two together as her face rather quickly turned beet red and turned back to the two staring at her. Eating from the same pair of chopsticks or drinking from the same cup or can of soda was a very intimate thing to do between two people, especially in Eastern cultures. It was a bit less meaningful in the Western cultures, but even there it still held some significance. I didn't mean to. She spoke in half sentences as her brain was overloaded by embarrassment before pointing at Shirou accusingly. I didn't do it on purpose, you idiots. You two should know better than that by now. Okay. I get it. Shirou retreated from the girl sitting next to him and back into Sakura. It was an accident. No need to kill me. I think it's better if I feed you, senpai. Sakura spoke up with a not-so-subtle blush on her cheeks. I mean, Tosaka-senpai is too rough when it comes to this kind of thing. She might accidentally choke you or embarrass herself again and take it out on you. What do you mean by again? Rin shouted in defiance, her state of embarrassment still not gone. I am not clumsy. You kind of are. Shirou pointed out. More than half the times I was injured were because you forgot to do something at the last moment when you were testing something out. He looked up and began to search his memories for such examples. Let's see, there was the time you began to make mechanical familiars, and then there was the time you attempted to mimic tracing, and there were the few weeks you were trying to fine-tune your element manifestation control and tried to show off. I still have some nice marks from when. That's unfair. Rin pointed at the boy, all self-control lost as she panicked like a small child. You make it sound like I was responsible for everything bad in your life. I didn't. She frantically tried to think of an example that didn't put her in a bad light before looking at the boy's left arm. I didn't cut off your arm. Ha! She claimed in success. So it was cut off. Sakura stated accusingly as she glared at Shirou. What did you expect me to say? Shirou exclaimed. Fujine was around at the time and we didn't want to admit that the other was a magus. Let me guess. Rin smirked, glad that the attention had shifted from her to Shirou. You were sword fighting some other idiot and he cut off your arm. The boy frowned and puffed out his chest. For your information, I was making a new spell and it acted in a way that I didn't expect, and so my arm was cut off. Cutting your own arm off isn't something to be proud of, senpai. Sakura mumbled, somewhat embarrassed and causing Shirou to deflate instantly. Rin blinked. You were actually making a new spell? That's new. Normally you just focus on reinforcement, projection, and alteration. It's a variation of my projection and alteration. The boy relented. Unfortunately, I didn't take some things into account when I first tried it and I ended up losing my arm. He lifted it up and moved around slowly. It got healed since I was supervised at the time, but I'm not going to try it again until I've done more research. Slowly he reached for his cup and drank some of the water in it. Unless either one of you know how to keep an object fixated in terms of the GEO coordinate system regardless of planetary motion in the universe such that until removed it will remain as a physical constant in said system, I'm going to ask you two to not ask what it is. Keeping an object isolated in terms of G.E.O, you mean longitude, latitude and altitude, right? Rin blinked. Why the heck do you need to? She was interrupted as a loud gurgling sound distracted everyone, causing them to look at Sakura's stomach. I had a small lunch. She mumbled, embarrassed. The room was quiet for a few moments before Rin sighed and began to eat again. Screw it. We can talk about magic and mess with the others' heads after we eat while healing Shirou. I think that's a good idea. Sakura agreed as she picked up Shirou's food with his chopsticks and carefully put it near his mouth. Eat up, senpai. You know how much healing magic exhausts the person getting healed. Shirou nervously looked between Sakura, the food she was holding, and the seemingly indifferent Rin multiple times before letting his own hunger get the better of him. Alright, thanks Sakura. He smiled sheepishly before leaning forward and eating the food in front of him. He wouldn't admit it, but he doubted he would be able to eat a full meal in his current condition without stopping because of how much moving hurt his upper body at the moment. The meal was quiet and peaceful, however Shirou couldn't help but feel an underlying tension during the entire thing, especially when Sakura fed him for some reason. Oh. Several hours later Shirou was sitting on his porch with a cup of tea while Rin and Sakura stood in his backyard looking at him curiously. Rin had managed to heal his body to the point where he would be almost completely normal by the following evening, but at the moment he was fairly tired and still wouldn't be of much help in a fight. So since we're finally done, can you please finally explain some things for me? Rin crossed her arms. I know your projection ability is miles ahead of anyone else's, but what you did last night was putting things to a whole new level. Sakura looked at Rin curiously. What did senpai do that was so special? It's just projection. Rin's eyes narrowed. He recreated a sword that was a mystic code, one that was made to amplify the ether element. He shot it off like an arrow while simultaneously pumping full of mana and blasted the vampire away as if it was nothing. Neither his origin nor his element are ether, so there's no way he should have made such a powerful mystery so easily. Shirou sighed. It's not that hard to understand, Tosaka. Because of my origin, I can not only project weapons physically with unnatural accuracy, but their abilities too. I just never bothered to tell you, for example. He closed his mind and delved deep into his library of weapons to search for the best example he could think of. To his minor disappointment, it would be of significantly lower quality than he expected due to the fact that it didn't have any aspect that could be considered sword, but it would serve its purpose. Trace, on. He mumbled before a large thick whip materialized on his lap, one that Rin recognized instantly. That's. She gaped as she saw the weapon that nearly killed her 2 nights prior. It's the weapon the vampire was using against us. Yes. Shirou nodded as he grabbed the handle with his free hand and allowed the memories of the tool to enter him. Once more, the quality of the download was not up to his standard, but it would suffice as he casually flicked out his arm while channeling some prana into the tool, making it crack at the ground to his side and making a small crater in his yard, much to Sakura's surprise. Power and all, though not quite on the same level as the original. Amazing. Sakura said to herself in awe. Senpai is so talented. It's the only thing I can do well, to be honest. The boy shrugged. I'm at best average at most standard thaumaturgy. So does this mean that in theory you could copy something like a noble phantasm? Rin asked Shirou with a sharp eye. The faker looked back at her casually and yawned. Who knows? I've never had a chance to copy a weapon on that level before. It's not like they display those things in museums. Oh, how he was glad he practiced twisting words around with waver in England. It was one of the most annoying and beautiful things about speaking in English. There were just so many ways to say the same thing in that language while circumventing facts. He used his experience in the other language to help twist his native one. Avalon was not a weapon, but a shield and a holster for a weapon. As such, he had technically spoken the truth. Come on. Rin yelled out, frustrated, clearly not happy with the boy's statement. There has to be some kind of special weapon that you have in that dense skull of yours. You have those basic element swords, but are you really saying that you don't have anything stronger? Something that you can practice with to push yourself? Shirou glared at the girl. And if I did? Why would I show it to you? I do want to keep some secrets to myself, you know. He shook his head. Regardless. I don't have anything monumental or significant to use against that ancestor. In terms of pure firepower, you still have me beat. The best I can do is catch her off guard from a distance and hit her with my bow. Rin rolled her eyes. Right. Your bow. Let me guess, you can pick her off from a mile away with a flaming sword. The more experienced of the two frowned. No. At best I could hit her from 3/4 ths of a mile away with a flaming sword, but even then I'd chose to use a wind element one for precision and piercing power so that she wouldn't see it as easily. Both girls stared at him for a moment before looking at one another owlishly. You know what? I'm just going to assume you have all long-ranged stuff covered. The elder of the two shook her head, frustrated. Since she hasn't attacked us yet, it means she's still recovering. If she's still recovering, she probably isn't that strong. If she isn't that strong, then a pierced chest or blown-off head can most likely kill her, unlike some of the stronger apostles out there. We still have to worry about the undead. Shirou pointed out. They're normally what apostles use to gather energy for themselves. If she's badly wounded, odds are she's going to go on a feeding spree in order to recover. Rin smirked. Oh, I wouldn't worry about that. If she wanted to do that, she'd have to do that in the city for the most efficiency, and that's the priest's territory. He may be an ass, but he'll at least do his job and keep their numbers down and stall her recovery. She crossed her arms. In the meantime, I think it's best if we prepare for a worst-case scenario. Which is? Sakura asked, unsure if she wanted to hear of what could happen. Rin held out her fingers and began to tick off her cases one by one. The bitch gets backup from her boss. She recovers faster than expected. She has a weapon that is more dangerous than what she had used on us before. And worst of all, she goes on a blood-sucking rampage and risks exposing our world to the rest of the world. It would be good if none of those happened. Shirou admitted as he drank more tea. But odds aren't likely. Best we can do for tonight is set up precautions for the undead familiars, that would at least delay two of those things from happening. Easier said than done. Rin sighed. Setting something up that targets familiars only without harming normal people without their notice isn't exactly easy, you know. Sakura spoke up. I think I can help with that, sort of. Shirou looked at the girl curiously. You can? He repeated curiously. How? The girl looked away, as if ashamed of the way she would participate. The Mato magic is the binding of others onto oneself, similar to the concept of absorption. It's rather effective against magical constructs and objects that are fueled by mana. Of course, why didn't I think of that before? Rin verbally berated herself. If we can set up bounded fields around town that use your magic to drain the zombies as traps, we can effectively kill off the vampire's forces without getting our hands dirty or wasting energy over a wider area. Shirou nodded in approval. The zombies would just drop dead in the middle of the street. He looked at the youngest one there and smiled. That's a really interesting and convenient power you have, Sakura. I'm really impressed. I'll need help though. Sakura nervously stated. I'm not very good at making bounded fields and producing long-lasting thaumaturgy. In the end, by the time we finish thinking of a solid field, it might be too late. I'll be the final judge on that. The Tosaka declared as she walked forward and grabbed Sakura's wrist. If I can teach swords for brains over there how to fine-tune his magic, I can teach you how to adapt your magic to fit a bounded field. Besides, Shirou's useless right now. I'm right here, you know. The faker sulked. So you'll have to work with me regardless. Rin continued as if Shirou wasn't there as she dragged the confused girl away. Come on. We'll start off in the middle of the area and hit the ground running. Establishing a conceptual effect on someone else's field is pretty easy if the field maker is working with you. Also, we have to determine where the energy taken will go. Odds are we'll just route the energies into one of the nearby ley lines in the area, which will. Shirou watched somewhat amused as the two girls disappeared around his home, no doubt to experiment on the roads. He was a bit relieved to see them getting along with one another finally. When the two girls were near one another, he always felt some underlying tension between them for some reason. He assumed that it was because they were both magi, but he couldn't shake the feeling that there was something else to it. Shaking his head in resignation, he decided to put away that thought for now. There wasn't any benefit to mulling over it at the moment anyways. Reaching to scratch an itch on his chest, he realized that he was still holding the projected whip. Analyzing the weapon again, the boy realized just how valuable and lethal the weapon in his possession was. Even downgraded, it was still of extremely high quality, much higher than most of the objects he had stored in his memory. The fibers were constructed out of the hairs of a powerful subterranean phantasmal beast, which explains why there was a strong earth-based mass manipulation spell engraved in it. It was seemingly simple in concept, but very complicated in execution due to the nature of how a whip was used, ensuring that it was strong yet unnaturally flexible at the same time. In fact, the spell was so simple in execution that it resembled the earth element-enhanced sword he normally used as arrows, but stronger. In fact, without even looking, Shirou lifted his free hand and projected the dull brown weapon into his hands. Trace, on. Hypothesizing and theorizing manufacturing processes. Comparing. Contrasting. Confirming similar traits and making. Editing blueprints to increase efficiency. Refining concepts. Mato residence. Damn it. Shinji yelled as he stomped around the house bored, irritated, and hungry. Where the hell is Sakura? I'm starving. That lazy good-for-nothing idiot is never around when you need her. I believe you let the world know several times already, Shinji. The raspy voice of Zoken stated in a tired tone from a hallway behind the boy, making him jump in surprise. Unless you are trying to do something with all that yelling though, I would have to ask you to stop. Those uncouth loud noises are not making my ears any sharper. Gee, grandfather. Shinji squeaked in shock and fear. The boy may not have been a magus and fully aware of how dangerous the man may be, but he knew enough to watch his tongue around him regardless. Everyone in the family feared Zoken Mato, and the smart ones never went out of their way to out why. I was just wondering where Sakura was. That's all. She hasn't been here in a couple of days and we're running out of food. So get some yourself, you foolish boy. Zoken sighed and shook his head. Sakura has been at one of her classmates' home for a few days, and she'll be a few more before she returns. He turned to walk down to his basement again. Honestly. Has the Mato fallen so far as to become incapable of even feeding themselves without someone to hold their hand? It is a miracle I got my hands on the girl when I did. Shinji stood there in silent shock and rage as he listened to the old man's silent footsteps echo down the stairs. How was it that he, the old man's descendant by blood, was looked over for some weak-minded slut? Sister? Ha! Don't make him laugh. He knew the truth. She was merely thrown away and his family was generous enough to pick her up like the trash she was. So what if he didn't have any magic circuits and she did? He was a Mato while she was just some tool to ensure that the family still had power. You withered old geezer. Shinji hissed under his breath as he went to grab his coat. Can't feed myself? Honestly. Who the hell does he think he is? He walked to the front door and opened it. He had completely forgotten, or rather completely ignored the fact that there were many disappearances occurring around the city lately. He had brushed off the fact that it was currently close to dark. And he had absolutely missed the small smirk his grandfather had on his face as he turned away to walk down the stairs before he left. Norway. Waver panted heavily as he ran from the castle as quickly as he could. The sun was setting over the mountains, giving the sky a dull red appearance, a fitting scene for his current situation. Despite the fact that he was not a magi that focused on the application of magic like enforcers, he still managed to keep up with the remnants of his forces as they bolted past the trees in the forest at inhuman rates. Still, if their opponent was truly after them, it would not take long to reduce their already minuscule number even further. Impossible. Out of a force of 100 magi including himself, only a fraction remained alive and a fraction of that managed to escape without getting captured. From what he saw, only around a dozen or so fighters were running with him. And to think that Louvre was supposed to be the weakest of the current dead apostle ancestors. What the hell was that thing? Shouted one of the enforcers as they passed by Waver. I've never seen or heard of a code like that in my life. It wasn't a code. Waver shouted, repeating the same thing he screamed at the top of his lungs before sounding a retreat. That was a rude be damned noble phantasm. A noble phantasm? The man shouted in disbelief. Waver got a good look at him. His right arm looked like it had been shattered in multiple places and he was holding his right side in a way that indicated several broken ribs as well, yet there was not a scratch or a drop of blood on him. No one mentioned that he had something like that. I noticed. Waver snapped. He must have gotten it recently. That's the only reason why I wouldn't have read it in the files I got before starting the damned operation. His mind flashed back to not even an hour ago when he watched his forces get butchered by a single vampire wielding that terrifying mace. "What was that thing doing to us, my lord?" asked a woman armed with a broken code that looked like a gun but with no mechanical parts. "It destroyed everything it hit without discrimination, without harming the outside. Not even our magic could slow it down." Waver bit his lip and frowned. He could only partially answer this question at the moment due to the fact that he had studied Shirou's structural grasping technique a fair amount when he first learned of it. His studious habits enabled him to become far more adept at the skill than a vast majority of magi in the association, but it was still nowhere near the level that Sirius and Shirou could naturally reach. As such, he had managed to grasp only a few key aspects of the tool before he ran like hell. Its damage is dealt similar to a conceptual weapons, focusing on internal damage and bypassing outer machinations completely, though what truly is frightening is not the power each blow has, it's that it deals internal damage to all things, magic included. The enforcers listening to him shivered as they slowly realized what their leader was saying. Conceptual damage to the internal workings of anything, that means, yes. Waver nodded. It can destroy the structure and foundation of any magic it physically comes across once activated. In short, there is nothing that can be used to defend against it short of a massive steel wall. And a weapon like that is in the hands of a dead apostle ancestor. Another male enforcer lamented. This doesn't bode well for anyone. Combining his inhuman speed and strength with such a power, he is near unstoppable. Not exactly. Waver commented, gaining the attention of his followers. There are conditions that need to be met to use that noble phantasm's power. He grit his teeth. Unfortunately, I'm not capable enough in that branch of structural grasping to determine what they were, only the fact that there were two of them. Structural grasping? Could something as useless as that truly give you that information? The female enforcer from before asked curiously. Waver nodded. Yes, however, it is a very unique variation that requires a magus naturally in tune with magic that focuses in that branch of thaumaturgy in the first place. To my knowledge, only 2 magi are proficient enough in it to get all of the secrets out of that weapon, and one of them is McGinty. Shit. Swore one of the enforcers behind Waver, pretty much voicing what everyone else was thinking. Who's the other guy? The Lord swore under his breath in irritation, knowing he had to give some sort of response. Perhaps it was the frustration that made him utter his next few words, perhaps it was something he truly believed, but regardless, the following 4 words that came out of his mouth would be echoed for years to come. Oh, Japan. Shirou sneezed. Are you okay, senpai? Sakura asked curiously. You've been doing that a lot lately. Are you sure you aren't sick? That's a surprise. Rin chuckled. I thought fools couldn't catch colds. Very funny. Shirou grunted as he wiped his nose. It's true that I've never gotten sick before, but not because of something stupid like that. He sniffed before looking around at the intersection in front of him. It was 2 days after Rin and Sakura had begun experimenting with their new bounded fields, and he would be the first to admit that the 2 girls worked fast. Lying on the streets in front of him were roughly a dozen corpses completely drained of mana and as threatening as a blade of grass. He could tell that the invisible field covered the entirety of the intersection, hell, he could practically outline it from where the bodies dropped on the edge. On one hand, he was extremely pleased that the field worked so well, on the other. You noticed it too? Rin stated in a grim tone as she noticed Shirou's calm face. Noticed what? Sakura asked curiously. What's wrong? The field is working perfectly. Yeah, it is. Shirou nodded. But look at how many undead we have here after only half a night. This is a major intersection, but we have almost 25 undead here. The vampire is getting reckless, sending so many of its familiars through such a populated area without care of trying to hide them. Rin continued through grit teeth. If this keeps up, we're all going to be in deep crap, if not with the undead then with the association. What the hell is that stupid priest doing? Beats me. I'm not his babysitter. The redhead shrugged. Are there any other fields nearby that you guys set up? Sakura nodded. Yeah. We set up another one by the park near the river. It seemed like a good place to put it. Let's go check it out. Rin grunted, clearly not in the best of moods at the moment. Hopefully there'll be more of those bastards drained at that field. Then we know at least that we can limit her recovery and intake of mana. Damn it, the one time I wished that this place wasn't one of the most naturally rich places of mana on the planet. Yeah. Shirou nodded. I know what you mean. Even if the vampire didn't have any familiars, she'd still recover from most wounds pretty quickly here. Should we be out then? Sakura looked around nervously. If she's recovered, I might be holding you back. Rin smirked and flipped her hair. Don't worry. I have several jewels with me this time and the bitch lost her favorite weapon. After what we've seen before, I'm fairly confident that Shirou and I can take her on without much issue. Why do I have a feeling you just signed my death warrant? The boy asked while experiencing a massive shiver down his spine. The boy looked at his friend confused before shrugging. Go ahead and ask me anything, Sakura. What do you want to know? The girl looked down a bit before glancing at her sister a bit of a ways ahead of them. What do you think of Tosaka-senpai? Huh? Shirou blinked. What do I think of Tosaka? Why do you want to know that? I'm just curious. She feebly explained. I haven't talked to her much, but it looks like all she does is boss you around. Why do you spend so much time with her if she's so mean, other than the fact that she's blackmailing me with my life? The boy sarcastically thought, but didn't say on the chance that said blackmailer was secretly listening in on their conversation. Well. He started slowly. She's not all bad. I mean, she fakes her outer personality during school when she's really an impatient slacker that screws things up a lot when the time counts. She's egotistical, rude, and has no reservations at making comments that really shouldn't be said. He was so busy listing off Rin's bad points that he didn't notice her hands balled up into fists and shaking not too subtly. And she is responsible for more of my injuries than my teachers combined. I think. He concluded. Then, why do you still spend time with her? Sakura asked, though she had a small smile on her face as her crew listed off all of the bad points her supposed genius sister had that she never knew about. The boy shrugged. Well. I can tell deep down she isn't a bad person. If something is wrong in front of her eyes, she isn't able to just leave it alone, kind of like how I can't leave a broken electronic bee without trying to fix it. He crossed his arms and looked up to the sky in thought. And even though she tries to deny it, she has helped me out with my magic in the past without me asking for it. If you ask her about it, she'll just claim that she didn't want the magus under her to be so pathetic, but I think she really does care about my progress and well-being. He smiled lightly. Or at least that's what Sirius Gigi and Waver NII are telling me. Plus it's nice to have someone my age to talk about magic with every now and then. I see. Sakura smiled weakly and she turned away. Since you had Tosaka-senpai around, you didn't need to talk to me about thaumaturgy at all, I guess. The boy blinked and looked at the girl. Tosaka had nothing to do with me not talking to you about thaumaturgy, Sakura. It's just things were so calm, happy, and simple the way they were that I didn't want to bring something like that into our lives. Since you didn't bring it up either, I just assumed you agreed with me and wanted to keep things nice and easy. If you wanted to talk about magic, I wouldn't have minded at all really. His mind flashed to seeing those living things inside Zoken and how there were traces of those same things inside Sakura. If you need to talk to me about anything, just ask Sakura. My doors are always open for you. The girl blushed and looked away shyly. Thanks, senpai. I feel a lot better knowing that. She smiled happily. Sometimes it's almost like you're a superhero, especially now when I know you can use swords." Shirou flinched. Despite his efforts to follow Kiritsugu's advice, deep down he still wanted to be a champion of justice. Smiling sadly, he looked up at the sky. "I can't be a superhero, Sakura. Dad showed me that the world isn't that simple, and that I'm too distorted to be one anyways." Distorted? The girl blinked in confusion. "How are you?" Her question was cut short as Shirou's arms suddenly shot up in front of her, causing her to stop. "Senpai?" "Tosaka." Shirou grunted in a serious tone. "She's back?" Rin asked briefly as her eyes darted around and she tried to feel out where their opponent was. "I can't tell." The male frowned. He could tell where the vampire was, but something was different this time. "She's definitely waiting for us in the park, but for some reason her signature is stronger than the last time." "Goody." Rin grumbled without turning around. "Sakura. Go back to Shirou's place. You'll be safer there. Root knows what Zoken would do to Shirou if you died under his watch." "But..." The girl stammered, now scared at how things were changing so quickly. "Go, Sakura," Shirou stated in an unnaturally even tone. "Please. I don't think I can protect you from her." Sakura shivered. She had seen many sides of Shirou before, angry, sad, happy, excited, but he was never calm like this before. The way he carried himself now was akin to when he was on the archery range, his entire being on the verge of setting off yet unnaturally at ease at the same time. "All right. Please be careful, senpai." She reluctantly agreed before turning around and running back to Shirou's place. Rin and Shirou remained quiet until the youngest member of their group disappeared from sight. "You seem to have a pretty big fan, Emiya." Rin commented almost casually, though there was an underlying tinge of jealousy as well. "She's just worried about me." The boy sighed. "She's a nice person. She cares about everyone like that. It's who she is. I don't see how I'm special to her." The Tosaka looked at her partner skeptically before shaking her head. She was beginning to think that there really was something wrong with her friend, but she put it away for later. They had a vampire to deal with. "Whatever. Come on." She spoke plainly before turning around and ran with the aid of reinforcement to where Shirou said the vampire was. Less than a minute later the two stopped in the park by the edge of the river, a little over a dozen meters away from their opponent from several days prior. At first glance she seemed to be exactly the same as she was before, both in attire and in confidence. However, both Shirou and Rin could feel that she was somewhat stronger than she was before for some reason. Well. The woman purred as if talking to two old friends. "That certainly was fast. You two certainly are pretty quick on the uptake. I thought that it would take a few more days before you found me." She crossed her arms and looked around at the park. "I must admit though, I'm impressed with this field. I've never heard of an effect that can drain familiars of their mana before." Her red eyes zoomed in on Rin hungrily. "I'm impressed at your work, girl." Rin took things in stride and flipped her hair confidently. "Humph. You must not be that experienced if something as basic as that impressed you." "Confident. I like that. The confident ones always have a good zest to their blood." The predator licked her lips hungrily before turning to Shirou. "But unfortunately my business isn't with you, girl, it's with the apprentice of the code crafter." "So you are the ones that kidnapped the old man?" Shirou frowned. "How did you do it?" The woman blinked before looking at him confused. "Whatever do you mean, boy?" "I simply knocked him out in a fight. Simple as that." "Don't lie." He snapped, getting raised eyebrows from the females. "There's no way someone on your level could have beaten him alone without some sort of trick. You're nowhere near as strong as he is." The vampiress frowned. The boy had hit the nail on the head. By herself, even when armed with her favorite weapon, she had stood no chance even against a heavily intoxicated Sirius McGinty. The large man's reinforcement abilities were so ridiculous she wouldn't be surprised if he was capable of performing absolute reinforcement, the supposed highest limit that spell could be taken to. She was halfway beaten to death before her brother had stepped in and they managed to take the old man down, but even then they had some issue dealing with him. The problem was, she had a feeling that had he been sober, things would have turned out far more differently. Does it matter? She grunted irritably. The fact remains that the old drunk is my father's prisoner, and we need you in order to keep him in line. Funny. Rin snorted. It seems like you're having enough trouble keeping this idiot in line by himself. Is he really worth all that trouble? Tosaka, don't make things worse. Shirou hissed. The woman inspected her elegant hand and nails lazily. Personally. Her blood-red eyes shot to them with pure bloodlust and her hand mutated into a sadistic claw. I would prefer to gut you two right now and bathe in your organs, then I'd kill the old perverted drunk when I get back home. Her voice was low and guttural and her face malevolent. However, I've been ordered to take you back home alive and not turned. A sadistic grin slowly etched on her mouth. However, he said nothing about what to do with that girl though. Shirou's and Rin's eyes widened in realization as to what the demonic female had just stated before the enemy bolted at inhuman speeds towards Rin with her claws ready to gut her. Shit! Shirou yelled as he instantly jumped in front of Rin, who in turn jumped back to retreat, swords already in hands, Odi flooding his body, and his arms already swinging to counter the woman's strike. Clang! Smash! Crunch! Shirou's weapons collided with the woman's unnaturally strong hands constantly in order to prevent them from tearing his body apart as easily as they were scratching his tools. 1, 2, 3. Bang! 1, 2, 3, bang! Shirou's mind was preoccupied with the counting of how many times his tools could take a hit from the woman's claws before they broke, and then firing off the gun in his mind in order to project another tool to replace the one lost without hesitation. In a way, he counted himself lucky right now. Most of his hands-on experience in fighting was with Bazette, who fought primarily with her fists. Because of that, even though he could tell that his current opponent was clearly faster and stronger than he was, she was vastly less refined in pure close combat than his teacher. As such, he had little trouble reading his attacker's telegraphed swipes before they got anywhere near him and could both counter and draw her into his projected openings, which she unconsciously aimed for like a wild animal. Despite the fact that his opponent was seemingly stronger than she was before, she was nowhere near as well armed as well, giving him an advantage as he managed to score some very glancing slashes on the progressively angry vampiress. Damn it! Rin grunted as she watched Shirou go toe-to-toe with the vampire once more without hesitation or thought about his well-being. She was getting tired of him always trying to protect her as if she was some fragile doll. Running to the side, the girl stuck her finger out at the woman and focused her OD to form her favorite offensive spell, the Finnish curse Gandr. Stop looking down on me, you bastards. Black orbs shot out of her finger like it was a machine gun muzzle at the woman, forcing the two melee combatants to separate lest they get hit with the attack. Unfortunately, the vampire was the first to get her bearings and instantly bolted to Rin, merely slowing down to avoid getting hit by the attacks. Shit! Shirou swore as he instinctively knew what was going to happen if he didn't act soon and instantly came up with an answer. Dispelling the swords in his hands and projecting his black bow, the boy drew back the string and went through his library at a record pace. A steel blue sword appeared notched in his hands before it contorted on itself into a drill. Concept identified. Target confirmed. Function installed. He quickly muttered as he put in the finishing touches on his missile just as the vampire was just about to close in on the girl. Jump! The boy bellowed as his sword began to glow intensely. Rin didn't know what the hell Shirou was up to, but she sure as hell didn't have a lot of options to go by and gladly followed Shirou's command, pouring more of her energy into her legs and retreating as far back as she could. In contrast, her opponent whipped around to turn at the source of the command and paled as she saw the boy holding something that she was very familiar with and not at all eager to see again. Shit! She swore and ran in an attempt to get away from what she assumed was another massive blast of energy. Dodge this. The boy muttered as he took final aim. Shatter, Helix Blade. The second he unleashed the weapon, the magic of gradient parallel he instilled in the weapon actualized, causing not one but at least 50 replicas of his arrow to fire off at once. Not stopping there, the blue lights flew not in a straight path, but in spiral uneven, but non-intersecting paths, all aimed at the shocked blood drinker, who moved even faster to get out of the way of the far faster projectiles, and for a few moments she had done just that. That was when she discovered the second trait of this particular arrow that Shirou had used. They homed in on their target. What the fuck? The woman shouted in surprise as the remaining lights corrected their paths in the air between Shirou and herself and began to land multiple glancing blows before each one plowed deeply into the ground as easily as they would have their original target. A water element blade this time. Rin mused as she watched the remaining blades gradually deal deeper and deeper wounds on their opponent, though none enough to claim the fight. He used the flow and cycle characteristics of water to create untraceable paths for all of the copies of the sword made from gradient parallel and then caused them to converge at the woman. There's no way that this is all simply reproduction of weapons to the highest degree. The level of control needed to perform the manipulation of a mystery like this is beyond mere physical and mystery-based copying. It's like he can naturally use any weapon he makes naturally as if it's his own, functions. And all. What are you, Shirou Emiya? Her musings, however, were interrupted as a burst of red and gold nearly blinded her. Row Ajax. The woman shouted while pulling back the sleeve on her right arm to uncover an oddly shaped armband, and was subsequently shielded by a 7-petaled wall that blocked the remaining arrows without any problems whatsoever, stunning both teens. Fuck. He muttered, pretty much summing up his thoughts quite nicely as his eyes rested on the beautiful 7th-sectioned bounded field as his mind was flooded with information. A conceptual weapon made for defense. 7 layers, each with the defensive capability of a fortress wall. If it's damaged it will reflect the condition of the user, but I don't think even Rin's jewels are strong enough to break one of those things, and the strongest thing I can do is, actually. Why yes, you are. The non-human smirked confidently. Do you like my new toy from Daddy? I figured it would be quite useful against those annoying attacks of yours, and it's almost as beautiful as I am. She stared at the bounded fields dreamily before cutting off her magic to make the shield go away. Now where were we? She grinned as she sauntered in Shirou's direction again before pausing as he drew back his bow again and aimed straight at her. Humph. She frowned as she stopped dead in her tracks and deployed her shield again. It seems that you can't take a hint, boy. This barrier of mine is too strong for the likes of you. You can't break through something like this. Shirou smirked as he took aim and a dark iron-colored sword appeared in his notch before it spiraled to become more aerodynamic. Funny thing about your shield. It's strong, yeah, but it has that interesting side effect of reflecting the health of its user. The pale woman's confident stance faltered and she stared at him in disbelief. Since that's the case, I wonder what would happen if I managed to break through even one of those barriers. How the hell do you? The non-human looked at him as if seeing someone who was truly a threat for the first time. This sword should be strong enough now to break through and resist Gaia's interference long enough to work, hopefully. The boy mentally prayed as his chest began to glow. Drive puncturing blade, triple excel. He actualized his mystery and released his projectile, which collided with the red and gold barrier before the aria he used even reached the ears of the females, appearing as a dark streak in the air that seemed to rend the night sky itself by means of pure speed before it met with the first thing that stood in its way. The loud collision between a relentlessly strong and fast projectile and the equally absurdly sturdy shield echoed through the area as if a bomb had just been set off, and as such there was a strong enough shockwave that a large cloud of dust prevented both Shirou and Rin from seeing the results. Shirou however took no chances and instantly retraced his standard swords back into his hands and dashed to where Rin was still staring at where the two powerful mysteries collided. Rin. Focus. There's no way that was enough to beat her. The boy's demanding command seemed to snap Rin out of her delirium just in time as the enraged form of their opponent shot out of the cloud of dust right at her, claws ready to swipe her head off. Screaming in surprise, the girl jumped back just before she was decapitated, and once more glad for Shirou's aid as the boy once more interrupted the woman from coming after her, engaging the bestial individual in melee combat yet again. How? She roared as their weapons collided and causing sparks to fly. Unlike before though, Shirou noticed that it took a few more hits for his weapons to break under the relentless assault. How could some nameless child like you break through two of my fields? How did you know about Rou Aia's mystery so quickly? What are you? Despite his opponent's relentless questions, Shirou not once responded as he fought her with unwavering eyes and deep breaths. If he had time to talk, he was better off using his energy to keep up with this bitch. Why answer questions that would only make things harder for himself if he did? He was not an egotistical magus from the association or some priest from the church. He was a sword, and even the ones that were possessed or were enchanted to have minds of their own weren't dumb enough to talk in the middle of a fight. He dealt with this situation like a professional, not a scientist. This was what Bazette trained him for. This was what Waver and Sirius trained him for. This was what his Shirou Emiya, no, the magus killer trained him for. This woman attempted to harm the people he cared about to get to him, and as such he would react in the most appropriate manner he knew, by tearing the bitch apart. Crash. Clang. Splurt. Crunch. Snap. Thud. Splash. The sound of metal tearing through flesh was slowly meshing with the standard sound of metal breaking and warping that had been standard in the bout so far as Shirou's style and experience surpassed his opponent's speed, strength, and stamina despite the fact that his limbs and body were beginning to feel as heavy as the weapons he was constantly projecting. Blood that was not his own fell to the ground in small bursts as the woman's clothes were slowly cut and dyed red to mix with the fashionable black and white Gothic look she was dressed in. The man nodded and snapped his fingers almost lazily. The world froze for the faker as slowly two undead dragged the shivering and heavily sobbing Sakura Mato from the same alleyway their master had dragged them out of. I would bring her closer, but that rather interesting and annoying field in the park would make things rather bothersome, now wouldn't it? The man grinned. Plus I am too much of a gentleman to handle women so uncouthly. Shirou didn't say anything as he looked at Sakura with wide and disbelieving eyes. It was bad enough that both girls were taken hostage and that one of them would bleed to death if something wasn't done soon, but this was just so outlandish and cruel that it had to be a bad dream. There was just no way, it couldn't be possible, his eyes had to have been playing tricks on him. No. Despite everything he wished, the image wouldn't change, because holding Sakura in place on her right side was the undead, lifeless but still moving carcass of Shinji Mato staring at him with a gaping mouth and drool running down his jaw. You. Shirou's fists shook uncontrollably. I'll kill you, both of you, over and over. That's nice, but even if you do manage to do that, boy, it would most likely be after my dear sister guts your cute friend and I feed your other one to my ghouls here. The man smirked sadistically, showing his sharp teeth. In fact, I think we should have a little fun for all the trouble you caused my dear sister and I. He stepped forward. You have to choose which one of us dear siblings you have to surrender to, and subsequently which one of our pretty little hostages will go free. The other will, well, I'm fairly certain you can piece together the rest. Ooh. How delightfully sadistic of you, brother. The sister happily chuckled as she saw Shirou's face pale even more than it already did moments before. Yes, boy. Choose, but do it quickly. This girl here isn't going to last long if you wait. Sure, Ro. Rin gasped, her consciousness fading. Forget me. Sakura on the other hand couldn't say anything as she was still in a mild state of shock from being exposed to Shinji's current state. The brother laughed as he saw the boy begin to panic. "Now sister, don't rush the boy. He's going to come with us to father no matter what he does. Let things play their course so we can enjoy ourselves." He paused as the boy's eyes slowly developed a light to them. "Oh? You've come to a decision already? That was rather fast. I thought you would take more time to." He paused and frowned as one of the boy's swords dispelled from his hands and he grabbed the other with both, pointing the edge to his neck. "Ah." He frowned. "So it's like that. Let them go, or I'll take my head off," the boy stated in a no-nonsense tone. "Now, you're bluffing." The sister snorted, ignoring the shocked looks the sisters were giving the boy. "You wouldn't dare kill yourself." She stalled as Shirou pushed the weapon to his neck, drawing blood. "Maybe a normal person wouldn't." The boy smirked. "But unfortunately for you, my personality is a bit broken when compared to the norm. You see, I'm the kind of guy that would sacrifice himself to make sure the people he's close to are okay without hesitation or even needing to think about it, or to be more accurate, it's more like I'm almost unable to as a base function, and since you clearly need me alive for your old man, I'd say you'd be in pretty trouble if something happened, wouldn't it?" The area was dead quiet as the three glared at one another temptingly, before Shirou decided to make another push with his blade and cause more of his blood to flow down his neck. "Fine." The brother barked, clearly not amused anymore. "We will let the humans go so long as you come with us and do not resist. You have my and my sister's word as the children of Louvre that no more harm will come to them. We will even drop them off at the local hospital to make sure you behave." He glared at his sister as if to tell her not to argue with his decision before looking at the boy again. "Now lower your blade, boy. Swear on a geese." Shirou growled, shocking the siblings as he lifted one hand and began to trace several runes into the air. A makeshift contract that Sirius had taught him when Shirou had learned of some of the methods his father had used as a mercenary. It wasn't as strong or potent as a normal written contract, but the backlash was still something that all magic users would attempt to avoid if possible. "I, Shirou Emiya, swear to not attempt to escape the children of Louvre in return for Rin Tosaka's and Sakura Matu's safe delivery, alive and not crippled physically or mentally, to medical aid in Fuyuki and all blood that bear the title of Louvre refrain from attacking any and all uninvolved individuals within the grounds of Fuyuki." He swiped some of his blood off of his neck and wrote his name in the air, sealing his end of the contract. Rin's and Sakura's eyes widened in surprise as they slowly realized what the boy had just done and attempted to feebly try to stop the contract from finishing. The siblings looked at one another warily before the sister brushed a finger against one of her wounds and repeated the signature process, followed by her brother who bit one of his fingers to draw his blood. "There." The brother frowned as he felt the magic take place in his circuits. "It's done. We'll take the girls to the hospital and you'll be coming with us to our father without any resistance." The boy nodded as he finally took the sword away from his neck and dispelled it, glaring at the woman holding Rin. "It's not good to hold the injured like that. If she dies, you're going to suffer too." The sister clicked her teeth as she dropped Rin roughly onto the ground, causing her to cry out in pain as she landed. "Tch, fine brat. I'll stop hurting the girl." She started off slowly before once more grinning sadistically at him. "But there are no rules about hurting you." Faster than Shirou could react, the woman shot forward and clawed him across his chest. The wounds were nowhere near as severe as Rin's, but that did not stop them from hurting or bleeding. Then the scratches were followed up with more as the woman tore into the teen without hesitation. "This is for breaking my mountain lion. This is for shooting me with that accursed bow. This is for making me look like a fool in front of father. And this is for just pissing me off." She roared as the boy was injured over and over again. Pain. It was indescribable and blinding that blocked out all coherent thoughts that could have belonged to Shirou. His chest was on fire from the outside and he felt his blood leak out, making him feel like he was being drained on the inside. No amount of training could prepare him for this magnitude of discomfort as he felt his consciousness wane. But he didn't black out. He still knew far greater pain than this, where his entire body burned from both outside and within, torturing a weak and frail shell of a boy with no magic, no hope, no energy. What he was experiencing now was a far weaker in comparison to now, with his stronger body and will keeping him alive and an opponent that would eventually stop, unlike that relentless fire that only knew of destruction. As his body fell to the ground, he saw Rin and Sakura looking at him both with tears in their eyes. At least those two would be alive and safe. The vampires were only here for him. After they took him away, the city and the girls wouldn't be threatened by the vampires anymore. At least he could ensure that much. Shirou Emiya apologized to his father and his teachers. On multiple occasions they had berated him for his selfless tendencies and nearly killing him, whether it was in training or when he did something by accident, but he simply couldn't fix that part of himself. It was simply a main aspect of who Shirou Emiya was. Oh well, at least he had managed to turn one of his greatest issues into something useful for once. Maybe Rin and Sakura would one day forgive him for this reckless action, but if he could save their lives by giving his up, he would gladly do it. For a while he would hesitate if he was asked if he would give his life for another person's, but for some reason he felt he could do that for Rin and Sakura. For some reason he felt as if those two truly mattered more than his life did. For some reason for those two, he would move from his spot on that hill of blades, he could be drawn. His semi-delusional thoughts were interrupted as he felt his body being picked up again by the woman who had until moments before been kicking and maiming it, holding him by the neck. He heard her muse hungrily. Now that I have a good look at you, boy, you aren't that bad of a specimen. She licked her lips hungrily. I might as well have a taste of the little shit that's been causing so much trouble. You can't be any worse than those other fools in this town. Don't worry though. I'm not going to turn you, just make sure you don't cause any trouble on the way back. The boy didn't know what came over him or why the words came to mind, but at that point in time, he felt that if he was going to be captured, he might as well make them realize what they had with them. My body is... He grunted in pain as the woman's mouth approached his bleeding neck. Is mine now, boy? She grinned as her mouth closed in on Shirou's neck and began to drink. The brother on the other hand frowned as he felt something unnatural happening with Shirou. Sister. Stop. Maid of blades. The boy finished the mantra that he knew described his entire being without any question with a raspy voice that caught everyone's attention. The woman's eyes widened as images flooded her mind in rapid succession. A barren hill littered with weapons. A gray-blue sky laced with clouds. A golden scabbard that possessed unmatched holy qualities. A burning field with a black sun. A man in his 30s that looked like he could kill anything and everything without batting an eyelash. The girl she had just moments before held hostage. The girl her brother held hostage. Swords. Swords. A shriek of pain and anguish pierced the air as the woman threw Shirou away so hard that he was knocked unconscious upon landing, while the assaulter herself began to cough relentlessly from her bleeding and torn mouth with her hands around her throat, spewing out blood from her mouth as she gasped for air, blood and shards of blood-red metal as sharp as razors. Sister. The brother yelled as he ran to his sibling worriedly before stopping and seeing the shards of metal that were coming out of her. Something was wrong. Something was extremely dangerous about the boy, and his sibling had just apparently been assaulted by the full brunt of it. What in the world? Impossible. The woman hacked and wheezed. He's human, but what? The brother yelled frantically. What happened? He has reality. Marble. She yelled in rage, causing all that could hear her to freeze in shock and disbelief. Before anyone could ask the woman any more about what she had discovered, she had bolted to the unconscious boy with her hands drawn. I'll kill him. This little shit has embarrassed me and father for the last time. I will not allow a mere human have something that even father has yet to achieve. Time ran still for everyone conscious and watching. The brother attempted to stop his sibling from going against father's orders. Rin and Sakura shouted Shirou's name in a vain attempt to wake the boy and get him to move. But none of the three could do anything in time as the enraged woman struck down on Shirou with everything she had in order to end him. Fragarak. That is the end of the chapters for today. The name and author for this fanfic will be in the description down below if you want to read it yourself. See you tomorrow, peace.